Good evening, everybody. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Barker.
Yes, good evening, Mr Mayor. Can I apologise on behalf of councillors, and I forgot her name, Yvonne Williams and Roy Webb, please.
Thank you. Councillor Stanton.
Councillor Winter and Councillor Amaraju.
Thank you. No others? Are there any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Right. Item 3A. Minutes of the council meeting held on the 21st of November. Councillor Poulter. You're proposing them. Thank you. And the extraordinary meeting, are we taking them together? Are you happy to do that? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Item is Mayor's announcements, and I have several, please. First, a belated Happy New Year to you all. I know it's only January. Firstly, I have some sad news and report the passing of two former councillors. Margaret Redfern was well known to virtually everyone in this room, having served for many years as a Labour councillor in Derwent. Margaret passed away quite suddenly earlier this month. Her funeral will take place at midday on the Friday, the 8th of February at Markeaton Crematorium. I'm told that contact has been made with the family, who would be happy to see councillors and officers who knew Margaret in attendance. In December, we sadly lost Richard Keane, a former Conservative councillor in Metre. I am pleased to say that the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Harwood, was able to represent the council and show our respects to Richard when he attended his funeral at St Matthew's Church in Darley Abbey earlier this month. I'm now going to invite Councillor Rawson to say some words about Margaret, followed by Councillor Keith, who will speak about Richard, and after that I'll open the floor to any other councillors who wish to make contributions. Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'd like to pay tribute to my great friend and former Derwent Ward colleague, Margaret Redfern. Margaret, as many of you will know, had been unwell for some time, but the news of her passing nevertheless came as a tremendous shock to me, and I'm sure to all of you in this chamber. Margaret bore the long-term conditions that she was suffering from with grace and without complaint, despite the fact that she hated hospital so much, and on quite a number of occasions it was quite difficult actually to persuade Margaret to actually go and receive the treatment that she needed. But Margaret was certainly a larger-than-life character. She'd got bags of personality, bags of compassion for other people, and was great fun to be with. Margaret really was a people person, and this really came over in her role as a councillor and how she interacted with her constituents. She loved people and was always concerned for their problems, and was absolutely unstinting in the casework which she undertook on their behalf. She was certainly tenacious, and once she was on the case, that was it. And I'm sure many officers will remember the tenacity with which Margaret pursued casework on behalf of her constituents. And that, Mr Mayor, was because she did genuinely really care. Margaret used to say that some of our constituents thought that the three of us, Margaret, Dave Roberts and myself, were related. That Margaret and Dave were mum and dad, and I was the son. Working with Dave and Margaret as ward councillors certainly felt like being family. We worked so well together, and each of us had strengths which complemented each other, and it was a great privilege to be part of that family. And Margaret certainly did fulfil the role of mum to me on many an occasion, often bringing a cob for me or something to eat from birds if we had meetings at lunchtime or evening meetings. I was first elected in 2005, and Margaret really took it upon herself to look after me and to help me to learn the ropes as a new councillor. And she was a real inspiration to me, as I'm sure she was to many people in this chamber. Margaret gave so much to the community. She served in Derwent and earlier in Blaegreaves, helping people and supporting those in need. Even latterly, Margaret has remained engaged with the Revive charity in Derwent and the work that it does in our community. We had great fun together over many years as Derwent councillors. Margaret had such a great sense of humour, and it was always a joy to be with her. She'll be greatly missed by everyone who knew her. Perhaps now she's been reunited with Dave up there, where they can resume their friendly banter. Margaret, you were loved and respected by so many people, and we'll miss you.
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Councillor Keith?
Unlike Margaret Redfern, not many people here would remember Richard Keane, really, but Richard Gerald Keane was born on the 25th of January 1927 and died on the 13th of December 2018 at the age of 91 years. He was born into a well-known Derby family. His father was a Derby architect, his grandfather was a noted artist, and his great-uncle was a famous early photographer. His father died when Richard was 7, so he was brought up by his mother, who incidentally lasted until she was 104. At the age of 17 years, he joined the RAF and was transferred into the parachute regiment during the Second World War. When demobbed, he joined Severn Trent Water Company as a land surveyor, a job which he enjoyed for many years. In 1952, he married Christine, who, for those of you who know her, was a lovely lady, very bubbly and lively, and together they had 4 children. Later, Richard decided to stand as a councillor and join the Conservative Party. He was originally elected to Derby County Borough Council in 1968, where he served until 1974. And then in 1974, he stood as a councillor in Derby Borough Council, which became Derby City Council in 1977, representing Mickleover Ward, and continued as a councillor until his retirement in 1996. Richard's proudest moment as a councillor was when he became Mayor of Derby in 1986-87. He enjoyed this role enormously, opening fetes and developing friendships with many people, and in particular the inhabitants of a French village that was built in Derby after the First World War. During his term of office, he opened a well-known Derby nightclub called the Pink Coconut and the Camera Beer Festival, both of which I mention because he was totally teetotal. And I feel he must have been the only mayor of Derby in its history to have opened the beer festival with a soft drink. Finally, after his retirement from the council, I used to see Richard socially reasonably regularly before he went into a nursing home. But my overriding picture of him will be him turning up to council meetings, as you can see from the picture there, with his large pointed beard, wearing his deerstalker hat and sitting in his open-top Morgan car. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Keith. Does anybody else wish to make a contribution? Okay, Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to say a few words in relation to Councillor Margaret Redfern. I well recollect back in 2010 on taking my seat in this council that the First two opposition members to welcome me was both Margaret Redfern and Dave Roberts. No airs, no graces, no politics, just a simple warm welcome from two fellow councillors in the adjacent ward to my ward, Derwent. As the first term progressed, I found myself on licensing and other committees that which were chaired by Margaret, including personnel. Whilst I had a knowledge both as to law and HR matters from my previous life, Margaret guided me through the minefield that is local authority duty. Its members, particularly the neutrality and fair dealing expected of those in cross-party statutory committees. A political neutrality sometimes forgotten today. Margaret also took an interest in markets, and I recollect travelling to Sheffield with her, together with Councillor Rawson, for a visit to what was then the new Moor Market. We used the train, a cheaper alternative for us old councillors. Margaret had to leave early, and having made our way back to the station late in the afternoon, Margaret's eyes lit up at the station taps, a real ale pub on Sheffield Station. At Margaret's insistence, of course, we entered into and immediately honed in on a quaffable little beer called Jaipur. Quite strong, but with the constitution of an ox, Margaret kept up to speed with the couple of rounds that we demolished. Unfortunately, we missed the next train as a result. And so Margaret insisted that we return to finish off what we'd started. We missed two more trains. Enough said. What occurs on tour stays on tour, but I have still got the pictures. Finally, I could not but mention the first pantomime which we as members took part in some 3-4 years ago. The rehearsals were fun, and again, politics were put on one side. Margaret could sing, but not dance. Again, we shared a commonality, or so I thought, with my fine singing voice. As the show closed on the first night, we all took our bows, entering from each side of the stage, towards the centre. Margaret and I met in the centre. Maybe it was my aftershave, I don't know. But she grabbed hold of me and planted a big sloppy kiss on my lips. That nearly created an international incident because Chris Williamson was in the audience and couldn't understand how a stalwart Labour member could be so familiar with a Conservative member. Margaret didn't care. Neither did I, for that matter. For the rest of the week, we met centre stage and again exaggerated that kiss every night. It was like Rodin and the Lovers. It continued to be regularly mentioned even now after Margaret's passing, an endearment to her fun-loving character. I knew Margaret as a friend and mentor in many areas of council life, both she and again I mention him, Dave Roberts. Both were respected for their views and conviction. Yes, we sometimes failed to agree. Yes, we're from a different political divide. But it would be nice if all members could reflect on the example shown by these two characters. This chamber would be the better for it. I and my colleagues will miss her.
Thank you very much. If there are no further contributions, I'd like to ask you all to stand for a short silence, please. Thank you. For my next announcement, I am pleased to advise that our excellent Holocaust Memorial Day group have again been working hard to put together a programme for this year's event. This group of volunteers contribute so many hours every year to support the delivery of the event, and I would urge all councillors to take a look at the various items in this year's programme. I would also like to invite you all to attend my civic reception for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, which takes place in the Jacob Rivers reception room at 1:30 p.m. on Monday. Now, there are a few procedural matters to make you aware of. You should all have received by email copies of the minute extract from Council Cabinet, which was circulated on Friday. Hard copies were circulated to your seats ahead of the meeting. There is also a long overdue late item on Member Training Day, which was circulated last week. I propose to take this item after the other officer reports and before the motions, so it is noted as item 12A. I will be reshuffling the agenda so we can consider item 10 on the designation of the monitoring officer at the end of the meeting after the motions. This will mean there is only one source of constitutional advice throughout the meeting. And finally, while we did begin consideration of the motion at item 13 on the agenda at the last meeting, I think it would be helpful to start again, so intend to treat it as a fresh motion. I understand Councillor Evans will propose some alterations under CP 53 to update the motion to reflect circumstances that have changed in the meantime. That's the end of my announcements. Statements from the members of the Council Cabinet, I have none. So we'll move on to questions from the public. There are 7 questions on the agenda. We'll follow the practice that we started a few meetings back, where summaries will be spoken by an officer, and then I will invite each questioner to put a supplementary if they have one. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The first question is for Councillor Smale. It's from Gaurav Pandey, and he'd like an update on plans to resurface roads in the Baltimore area.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr Pandey. Baltimore has seen significant investment in recent years, with over £500,000 spent in 2017-18 alone. There are no immediate plans to treat these particular roads. Bolton Neighbourhood Board have reviewed priority locations for footway and road maintenance to be considered for treatment in 2019 and 20, and not included the streets you've mentioned. The streets put forward, but guarantee that not all will be completed, are for footway maintenance: Shelfeet Drive, Compton Close, Brading Close, Thorners Close, and on carriage maintenance we have Matthew Street, Bembridge Drive, Shelfeet Drive, Thorners Close, Harvey Road, Bolton Lane, and the junction of Stanley Road and Harvey Road by the traffic lights. Whilst Holbrook Road would benefit from a surface treatment now, Field Lane has been inspected and assessed as a lower priority. In Bolton Ward alone, there are approximately 40 roads needing some form of treatment now, and a further 125 roads needing some form of maintenance in the next 3 to 5 years. This is also applied to footways, with approximately 107 footways needing maintenance now and a further 50 in the next 3 to 5 years. This, again, is also applied to 16 other wards across the city. We ask the neighbourhood boards to assist us with identifying local priorities, as we simply cannot do them all with the available funding. They are recommending locations and effectively escalating it up the long list of streets requiring treatment. All sites put forward by the neighbourhood boards are being reviewed now, and a final shortlist will be approved by Council Cabinet on March 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Mr Pandey, do you have a supplementary?
The next question, Mr Mayor, is from Doug Lumley, who asks Councillor Holmes about projected completion date and final costs of the A52 project.
Thank you for your question. Project management and engineering design resources have been significantly strengthened and are supported by independent technical experts to provide assurance on the delivery of the scheme. A revised set of drawings has been issued, and our contractor is currently working through these with assistance from the design team to provide a more robust cost estimate and revised programme. Our contractor aims to report back to the Council at the end of January. Once validated, we will then be in a position to confirm the estimated project completion date and estimated final scheme cost. All of this work will be completed as robustly and quickly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Do you have a supplementary, Mr Lumley?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you. I would like to say that my disappointment would be putting it mildly. This is typical case, and there is a question at the end of all this, of kicking it down the road. End of August, there was no news. We were going to get something at the end of autumn. Now we're at the end of winter, and we've kicked it down the road again. Now my question, Mr. Mayor, is what plans are in place to enlist the services of consultants or someone equally qualified to examine council operations and recommend improvements in the time and motion and completion thereof?
Thank you. A lot of work and a lot of resources are going on behind the scenes. I can give you that absolute assurance. A lot of resources are being put into this behind the scenes. I can absolutely assure you of that. We're going to learn from the forthcoming independent report, and we're committed to delivering this scheme for the benefit of Derby.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
The next question is again for Councillor Holmes. This time Brendan Connolly is seeking numbers of 2 or more bedroom bungalows or ground floor flats that have been let by the City Council or Derby Homes in the last 2 years.
Thank you for the question. Between the 1st of January 2017 and the 1st of January 2019, 122 properties with 2 or more bedrooms identified as suitable for disabled people were let through Derby Home Finder. Derby Home Finder is used to advertise properties for all social housing landlords in Derby. The 122 are from all landlords that use Derby Home Finder. Of the 122, 92 were Derby City Council / Derby Homes properties and let by Derby Homes.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Mr. Chairman, some 20 months ago, I came and asked about a bungalow for a disabled man who is quadriplegia, that is, all 4 limbs. So he has no movement from the chest down. Fareed Hussain told me in reply that he needed reassessing as the home he lives in now is not suitable. But it's still there, but you've let out 122 above this man who's quadriplegic. The only thing I can think is there must be vegetative state to be worse than quadriplegic. So can I ask why 20 months later it hasn't happened?
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you very much. I'm answering this question on behalf of Councillor Webb. So what I will say to you is that we're certainly willing to explore this particular case, and I would be very happy to refer it to Councillor Webb for further discussion with yourself or the person that you've mentioned.
The next question is for Councillor Smale from Councillor Bacon, from Simon Bacon. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, all of the remaining public questions are for Councillor Smale, and Mr. Bacon is asking why Councillor Smale is allowing noise impact data relating to the Sinfin waste plant to be withheld.
What force to be reckoned with, eh? Councillor Simon Bacon. It's got a nice ring to it. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Bacon. At the last CLG meeting, it was agreed that we would cover noise as a special topic at the next meeting. It was stated that we would need someone to talk to the group through the data that has been collected. The noise data is complex and needs a full explanation. RRS have made arrangements for this data to be properly presented to the CLG by ICL's retained noise consultant Spectrum at the next CLG meeting scheduled for 25th February 2019. Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Bacon?
I do, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I agree that noise data is complex, which is why public members of the CLG need it in advance of the meeting to get external advice, to be best placed to ask the right questions at the CLG meeting, at the presentation by Spectrum consultants, so they can represent the public in the best way. What harm is there in the public members of the CLG being told the levels of noise which blighted the Normanton and Sinfin wards in 2018 prior to the meeting, considering that the data was provided to the council itself months ago?
Thank you very much, Mr Bacon. I understand your cause for concerns with regards to noise complaints with regards to the plant. Once we've gone through this data at the next CLG meeting, I'm sure there will be some arrangements where we can be able to, in future, when there is more new noise data come forward, that we'll be able to share it with the group once you'll have more understanding of it. I'm more than happy to do that, and I'm sure when I speak to fellow officers, we can supply that information moving forward. Thank you.
Is Mrs Skrytek here? No.
We therefore move straight to Councillor F. Question F. This is for Councillor Smale from Brendan Connolly again. And the question is, why has work not started on the new toilets at Nottingham Road Cemetery?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr Connolly. Plans to build a new office and toilet block configuration have been explored but were considered too costly. We are now in the process of obtaining designs and quotations to consider the feasibility of refurbishing the existing toilet block at Nottingham Road Cemetery. And to date, we have received one design and quotation. Subject to funding, work is planned to commence in the summer. Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, in 2015, what first time I came to this council about there being no toilets in Nottingham Road Cemetery, the previous Labour team told me money was in place and it were ready to go. I've kept coming and asking and asking. I mean, when I first asked, Councillor Pegg were receiving money from Joanna Lumley and Councillor Banway was still the Führer. So why hasn't Derby's biggest cemetery got any toilets?
Thank you very much, Mr Connolly. I understand your frustrations with this, but there was a review of all the capital budget spend at the start of this new administration. That has been completed now, and the budget that was set for this particular project was allocated in last year. I'm more than happy to include you in when we do the designs. I'm happy to keep you in the loop moving forward to hopefully get these new blocks open by the summer. But I'm more than happy to share my contact details and we can discuss it, because it obviously means... No problem. I'll come. Cheers. Thank you.
Finally, Mr Mayor, question again from Simon Bacon, and he asks Councillor Smale what checks are carried out on what the waste contractor Biffa deems to be contaminated waste.
Thank you very much, Mr Bacon, for your question. Contamination is found in many forms. More common causes of contamination are plastic bags and films or bagged waste. Although a wide range of household items which cannot be recycled are often found, such as mirrors, pillows, duvets, hoses, children's toys, nappies, food and electrical items as a few examples. The worst of contamination, often the larger items, are removed at Victory Road before being taken to be reprocessed into the refuse-derived fuel. We receive regular updates and photographic evidence from the site staff, and council officers visit regularly to view the material and the contamination extracted. Thank
You have a supplementary, Simon?
I have, Mr Mayor, thank you. That list of things sounded like a generation game conveyor belt then. Is there an agreed level of contamination which Biffa will accept before applying charges on the council, or do we face paying for all contamination?
Thank you very much, Mr Bacon. I think you know what answer I'm going to give you here. Unfortunately, I do not know that information, but I'm sure I can get that with you by the end of the week. I can speak to the Service Director about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is questions relating to the Fire Authority or Derby Homes, and we have none. So we'll now move on to item 8, which is questions from non-council cabinet members, and we'll follow the same procedure. Officer will read out the summary, and the member will read out his answer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And the first councillor question is from Councillor Repton to Councillor Smale, and he wishes to know plans to introduce new car parking charges aside from district centres.
Councillor Smale,
Thank you very much, Councillor Repton. It is prudent for the Council to regularly review parking in the City, particularly as a response to issues raised from residents and businesses. In relation to district centres, the proposal is only to consider areas where restrictions, with or without charges, would have a positive impact. Neighbourhood boards and ward councillors regularly request the investigation of parking issues, and some may lead to proposals for restrictions or changes. The implementation of any scheme on the public highways requires a traffic regulation order, and there is a statutory process for consultation. With regard to on-street parking, our aim is to manage the use of the road network to ensure the safe flow of traffic and provide appropriate parking opportunities. Legislation requires all local authorities to ensure that there is a road safety or traffic management reason to introduce charges. In many areas, issues related to inappropriate parking may be resolved by introducing restrictions, which could be yellow lines or resident parking schemes where the residents request and support their introduction. In others, a blend of restrictions and charging may be used to make junctions safer and to encourage turnover of spaces, which in turn can be good for businesses. Thank you.
Councillor Repton, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Well, thank you, Sir Humphrey. That was sadly a yes minister answer that fails to answer the question. A yes or no would have sufficed, so I'll ask the question again. Outside of district centres, are there any plans to introduce any other additional car parking charges in the city, yes or no? And I'd like to add, are there any proposals to introduce car parking charges in my own ward of Darley next to the Abbey pub and Darley Park? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Repton, if you think that parking charges are justified in that area, then of course, with a consultation with your residents, I'm sure we can put that through. But we have to consider all options. And as we're going to be discussing this later in a motion, I think that you can't write all options off. And because it's a consultation, if the public don't like the idea of parking charges, then we don't implement them. Thank you.
Settle down, please. David?
Mr Mayor, Councillor Skelton asks Councillor Grimmadell how well the e-bike scheme is running.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to be answering this one. My view is that the e-bike scheme is working very well.
Councillor Skelton, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I would like to. Thank you. What about the issue of bikes being abandoned rather than put back into a hub?
Yes, I'm a user of the e-bike scheme quite regularly, actually, and I've become a big fan. There are some teething problems, whichever you want to call them, putting them into areas that aren't the designated hubs, leaving them so they have to be collected. All of these issues need to be wrapped up and have a review as we expand the service, which is exactly what I want to do. If you want to be part of those conversations, then I'm very willing to have a meeting with you so we can work out how we move forward.
The next question is from Councillor Metre for Councillor Grimmadell. He asks, when will work on a 50-metre swimming pool commence?
Good evening, Councillor Metre. Thank you for your question. This administration very much supports the need for new swimming facilities in Derby. The next steps for the new swimming pool complex will be brought to the Cabinet meeting in February, which will have in it the proposed timeline and date for the commencement of construction. Following a recent feasibility study to look at enhancing the leisure water aimed at making it more attractive to families, the preferred option for this administration to deliver includes a play structure elevation, 2 flumes, an exciting wave generating wow ball, play structure, a multi-slide and a wave rider, as well as the original facility mix, including the much anticipated 50-metre swimming pool.
Thank you, Councillor Grimmadell. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Metre?
I do, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much for your answer, Councillor Grimmadell. I look forward to the detail of the leisure facility and the feasibility report in February. Can I just ask, have you ensured that the pool is going to be slightly bigger than 50 metres to accommodate for the timing pads, and also ensure that the depth of the pool is at least 2.2 metres at the deep end, and not the proposed depth of 1.8 metres? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Metre. We have ensured that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The next question is from Councillor Kerr to Councillor Smale, and she wishes to know when will the assessment report on the waste plant be available?
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Kerr. The Commission technical report is in the final stages and should be received by the councils imminently. Once we have the opportunity to review the contents, this will obviously help shape any recommendations going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you, Mr Mayor. I was less interested in knowing when the council was going to receive it than when we as members and potentially wider could actually have sight of it. So when will it be available for councillors to read? We might like to contribute to the ongoing thinking.
Of course, Councillor Kerr, the report will be made available to the Exec Scrutiny Board, group leaders and ward councillors. Our usual confidentiality and commercial sensitivities would need to be respected, but those copies would be made available at the Council House to those involved.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Staying on the Wissinton Waste Plant, Councillor Peatfield wishes to know whether it has passed all the required tests and is fully functioning.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Peatfield. The plant has not yet passed its acceptance tests and assessment is still being carried out by the independent certifier. We are aware of further remedial works following planned downtime before Christmas and the plant is not fully up and running. As of the 23rd of January, lines 2 and 3 are running on waste with a throughput of circa 6 tonnes per hour. Line 1 is currently burning on oil whilst ICL waits for drum conductivity to fall. It is hopeful that line 1 will be in position to burn waste tomorrow, which is the 24th, and the turbines remain off, awaiting steam conductivity to come into specification for the machine. Thank you.
Councillor Peatfield, do you have a supplementary?
I do, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Smale. So, given that you've said that it's not fully up and running, that it was virtually shut down over Christmas, rubbish has been diverted to London Road, compactor waste is no longer going to the incinerator, there's been a noticeable reduction of refuse collection vehicles entering and leaving the plant, and more noise pollution reported this January. It's very obvious to local residents and councillors that it's not working. When are you going to terminate the contract? And I understand if you dither too much longer, you risk losing the right to terminate at all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Peatfield. I can confirm that waste did originally go to London Road, but now all waste is now going back into the Sinfin site. Obviously, there is concerns regarding to the contract, but those issues are still ongoing. And if you're wanting to be reported, my door is always open, and I'll be happy to discuss these with you. Thank you.
Next question, David.
We missed question M in the absence of Councillor Raju, so we'll move on to question N. Councillor Shankar asks Councillor Poulter if he will intervene immediately if the waste plant poses a risk of harm to anyone.
Councillor Shankar, thank you for the question. All emissions resulting from the operation of the Sinfin plant are constantly monitored, recorded and reported in line with the environmental conditions of the contract. In the very unlikely event that there is any evidence of harmful emissions from the plant, which expert advice from the Environment Agency confirms could cause a significant risk of harm to any person, we would, of course, immediately intervene and take the appropriate action.
You have a supplementary, Councillor Shankar.
I do, Mr Mayor. So, Councillor Poulter, having already changed your view from any risk to significant risk, and you may have discussed this at your meeting in Matlock today, what do you class as significant risk? Is it noise, odour, particulate matter, sulfates, nitrogen dioxide, or even, can I say, carbon monoxide from the ash pit?
Thank you, Councillor Shankar. Any evidence-based advice confirmed by experts from the Environment Agency which confirms might cause a significant risk.
Next question, David.
This question is from Councillor Rawson to Councillor Matthew Holmes. There are three parts to it. What officer and professional advice informed the manifesto pledge to refurbish the assembly rooms? Why were the figures inaccurate? And does this invalidate the electoral mandate?
Thank you for the question. Whilst in opposition, we took advice, the advice available and provided to us by officers during Labour Council administration. If you believe that our plan is merely to undertake cosmetic works, then you are badly mistaken.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Rawson?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, Councillor Holmes. I'm afraid you've not answered my question. I'd like to know who exactly you took advice from, what advice they gave, and why your figures were so wildly inaccurate. Can you tell this to us now, or do we have to revert to freedom of information requests?
Thank you for your question. I think I covered this at the call-in. We took the professional advice of officers.
Next question, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Bayliss wishes to ask Councillor Holmes if it's correct the final phase of the Alveston District Centre work will start in 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. The timing of any public realm works in the district centre is subject to agreement with the developers at Baltimore for highways capacity improvements, including a potential widening of London Road in the district centre. A key barrier to unlocking development at Baltimore is the creation of a new primary school, and Derby City Council is seeking Housing Infrastructure Fund, HIF money, to fund this. Planning permission needs to be concluded and a primary school constructed prior to any occupation of the new houses. The timescale for this is expected to be at least 18 months. Any delays to this would impact on housing delivery, with a knock-on effect on delivering the highway capacity improvements and therefore the district centre improvements. We currently expect it will be at least 20 to 21.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Bayliss?
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Holmes, for the answer. Ironically, this is part of a question I did ask the Director of Resources back on the 3rd of January, and he did actually send a very similar answer to me at 6 minutes past 7 this morning, just as I finished my shift. But I've got no further questions for Councillor Holmes. Thank you.
Next question.
Councillor Skelton, again to Councillor Matthew Holmes, whether there are any plans to extend the e-bike scheme beyond the city's boundaries.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. First and foremost, I would very much like to see the expansion of e-bike hubs across Derby suburbs before considering how neighbouring authorities may be able to support an expansion beyond the current city boundary.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Skelton? No. Thank you. Next question.
And again for Councillor Matthew Holmes, from Councillor Kerr this time, who wishes to know what impact predicted traffic level increases will have on access to Royal Derby Hospital and through Littleover and on air quality.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. The traffic management measures that have been proposed to allow Derby to achieve compliance with the legal limit on NO2 in Stafford Street, the one area of exceedance. These changes will not and legally cannot produce exceedances on any other street. The latest analysis suggests that the rerouting traffic will primarily use Uttoxeter Old Road and the southern part of the inner ring road, Lara Croft Way. There is no growth identified on the outer ring road. The impact on Uttoxeter Road and the route to the hospital is unlikely to change. The route through Pastures Hill and Littleover also has no growth as a result of the Stafford Street management plan. The implementation of the Stafford Street scheme will have some negative impacts on journey times. However, we will be asking government to fully fund a dynamic urban traffic control system as part of achieving compliance. This system will provide some mitigation for journey times, allowing management of a wider area of the road network to respond to changes in demand and day-to-day traffic volumes, as well as ensuring that the NO2 levels can be achieved in Stafford Street. The traffic management scheme deals directly with the area of exceedance, and the testing shows that it has a lower impact in terms of rerouting traffic than a city centre chargeable access scheme would have. The traffic management scheme also avoids the negative impact on business costs and households which would be associated with a chargeable access restriction. The Council is legally obliged to take action on NO2, and the preferred option is the most proportionate approach to solve this, the issue in the city.
Councillor Kerr, do you have a supplementary?
I do, thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I be provided with the current analysis and the reasons for the changes from the analysis which was shown at the public consultation meeting before Christmas, as that indicated significant traffic increases on the Outer Ring Road and on Burton and New Toxteth New Roads.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'm sure officers will be able to respond to that request.
Next question, please.
Again for Councillor Holmes, this time from Councillor Peatfield, who asks, what is the projected subsidy for the refurbished assembly rooms?
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield. The projected subsidy for the assembly rooms is identified in the Council Cabinet report for the project on 12th of December 2018, item 10. The relevant paragraphs are 7.2 and 7.3.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Peatfield?
I do. Councillor Holmes, putting aside your political desire to refurbish, are you confident that refurbishment offers the best value for money compared to the new build proposals?
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question, please, David.
This time it's Councillor Shanker to Councillor Grimmadell, and Councillor Shanker asks why the full findings of the feasibility study into an enhanced facility at Moorways hasn't been published.
Good evening, Councillor Shanker. Thank you very much for your question. The key information from the impact assessment report has already been published by the media. Key information from the draft feasibility study report builds on this information, and the latest proposals in relation to this to the enhanced leisure water for the new swimming pool complex will be in the report going to the Cabinet meeting in February.
Thank you, Councillor Shank. I take it you have a supplementary.
I do. First, I'd like to thank Councillor Grimmadell for admitting the full findings of the feasibility study haven't been published. Could I just ask Councillor Grimmadell when he first received the feasibility study report?
It was a very short time ago, Councillor Shanker.
Next question, please.
The next question, Mr Mayor, is from Councillor Rawson to Councillor Matthew Holmes, and he asks why Cabinet supports a subsidised model for the assembly rooms when an option requiring no subsidy was prepared.
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Cabinet has chosen the option that minimises the amount that the Council has to borrow to fund the works and the option that will be open quickest, therefore generating earlier economic benefits. A financial model prepared by officers shows that the annual revenue cost, once the venue has reached a steady state position, is projected to be lower for the enhanced assembly rooms option than the new build music and performance venue.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes, for your reply. My question is, why exactly do you think the subsidy will be lower for the reopened assembly rooms, and what gives you the confidence to think that this can be delivered?
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Again, as we debated in the call-in, at least 284 events per year will be held at the refurbished building, and that will use it to its full potential throughout the week and throughout the year. It's fully funded, it's deliverable within the financial restraints of the Council's budget, and alongside an enhanced swimming pool offer will deliver a legacy that this administration will be proud of.
Councillor Bayliss wishes to ask Councillor Grimmadell whether there are plans to close Alveston Library or turn it into a community-managed library.
Good evening, Councillor Bayliss. Thank you very much indeed for your question. I can confirm that following the completion of the CML's implementation review carried out last year, this is still the case. There are no plans to transition Alveston Library into a CML. There was never any proposal to close Alveston Library.
Councillor Bayliss.
Thank Councillor Grimmadell for the answer, Mr Mayor.
Next question.
The next question, Mr Mayor, is Councillor Skelton to Councillor Smale, and Councillor Skelton asks how the Council will use new powers on fly tipping.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skelton. The new powers introduced on the 7th of January this year are being reviewed by officers now. As I'm sure you're aware, but for the benefit of our councillor colleagues, they are allowed for fixed penalties to be served on homeowners who do not properly dispose of their household waste. There are some considerations to take into account before they are introduced, such as the level of charges applied and a process for considering representations from those issued with a charge. This is the work being undertaken at the moment. The new powers will complement the existing powers already being undertaken by our public protection team, which has been well received throughout Derby. Thank you.
Councillor Skelton, do you have a supplementary? No, thank you. Next question, please.
Next question, Mr Mayor, is Councillor Pete Field, who wishes to ask Councillor Matthew Holmes about methods of public consultation for the refurbishment of the assembly rooms.
Thank you, Councillor Pete Field. Many thousands of local people have taken part in public engagement and surveys, both political and non-political. There were extensive debates both within council and with the public and via the press. A series of engagement meetings also took place as part of the feasibility study to discuss the options for refurbishing and enhancing the assembly rooms.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Pete Field?
I do, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Holmes, in accordance with the Statement of Community Involvement, can you assure us that you have fully complied with this document, specifically on points 1.12, which is consultation standards, 2.8, which is development plan preparation, and 2.9, which is methods of engagement? And can you, as per point 2.18, produce a report demonstrating how the consultation was carried out?
Thank you, Councillor Pete Field. At the risk of repeating myself, we fully liaised and taken professional advice from officers on matters containing with regards to the refurbishment of the assembly rooms, including everything that you've just listed. Thank you.
Next question, please.
Mr Mayor, Councillor Kerr seeks Councillor Matthew Holmes' views on a letter sent by Salador, I think is the pronunciation, to all councillors about alleged shortcomings on the refurbished assembly rooms as a venue for touring shows.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I believe have fundamentally misunderstood what is being proposed in regards to the refurbishment and reopening of the assembly rooms. We are not and have never at any point suggested building or providing a theatre in Derby. Therefore, the context of the constructive feedback and opinion sent to all councillors by their Chief Finance Officer is based on a context that is not relevant to the conference, events and performance venue we are delivering. Previous work has indicated that to remodel the assembly rooms to deliver a theatre-style layout with full-height fly tower would cost over £45 million. I wish Salador every success for the future in providing theatre shows and managing suitable venues that fit their chosen market and expertise.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's a useful reply, but it puts back onto us the need for our business plan to actually work. And I wondered whether our business plan has fully considered some of the risks that may be there, including Nottingham's expectations of becoming a bigger conference venue very close to us.
Councillor Kerr, this administration is absolutely confident that the new refurbished assembly rooms will deliver for this city.
Next, and I think the last question, please.
Yes, Mr Mayor, this is the final question from Councillor Pete Field. It doesn't require a summary, it's to Councillor Grimmadell, and it simply says, how was the December 2018 ice rink funded?
Good evening, Councillor Pete Field. Thank you very much for your question. In 2018, the ice rink was funded by sponsorship income and from the Council's revenue budget allocated to Christmas activities. The breakdown of funding for the ice rink in 2018 was £10,000 from sponsorship from the Cathedral Quarter Business Improvement District, £16,666 to be precise from sponsorship income, which is being pursued by the Council from the 3 A's, and £36,334 from the Council's revenue budget allocated to Christmas activities.
Councillor Pete Field.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Two parts to my supplementary question. 16,666 being pursued by the council from 3AAA, who are in administration. So what confidence do we have that we're going to get that back? And secondly, Labour put £465,000 into the 2018 budget for the Christmas. Where on earth has that money gone?
The council will continue to pursue the 3As. I understand that was a Labour 3-year agreement for sponsorship, and as regards the budget for the Christmas offering for 2018, I think this administration provided a better Christmas than has been provided for the last 3 or 4 years. Thank you.
That concludes the cabinet, the non-cabinet members' question and answer session. I'll now move on to item 9, which is 2 council cabinet minute extracts relating to the council tax base and Derby economic growth strategy. You have the papers. Councillor Poulter, as leader, will you move these council cabinet minutes?
I so move, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Anybody wish to speak? No, in that case we'll move to a vote, please. All those in favour, please show. All those against? That is carried. We're going to skip item 10 for the moment, so it's item 11, which is a proposed change in appointment to an outside body. I don't know who's proposing that.
Item 11.
Item 11 is... Am I proposing that?
No, I recommend it. Just ask for a formal moving. Somebody formally move it.
Can somebody formally move? It's to appoint Councillor Grimmadell to the Derwent Valley Mills Partnership in place of Councillor Stanton. That's moved by Councillor Barker, seconded by Councillor Holmes. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anybody against? No, that's carried. Item 12 is on the committee system working group. Councillor Kerr, Eldrick, Graves or Wood, as members of the working group, would one of you like to move these recommendations, please? Moved by Councillor Kerr. Any seconder?
Before that, Mr Mayor, can I... Mr Mayor, may I ask for an additional resolution to be considered by Council on that? And there's some sheets available. I do want to make a small amendment to the one that's going to be going round to alter the wording at the beginning.
Mr Mayor, I'll move the resolution.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Kerr. So it's moved by Councillor
Wood, second.
Right, and Councillor Wood. Okay.
Thank you. Council is committed to fully exploring.
I'll give you all a second or two to read. Do you all need to read it for a second or two? And then Councillor Kerr will speak first, as if this is effectively an amendment. Thank you. Councillor Kerr, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can I just start by saying the paper that's been circulated, I'm sorry, I want to make a small change to say that instead of saying confirm that council is minded to, which is a bit legalese, to say that council is fully committed to exploring the change. Okay? So that council is committed to fully committed to exploring the change.
Sorry. Yeah. Councillor Kerr, can I just confirm then, we've just had an amendment by way of an additional recommendation, and can I just confirm that your proposal is now to alter that with the approval of the council? Because that way we get where you're going to, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, can I ask, are you prepared to agree this alteration? All those in favour?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The process of moving towards a committee process, committee organisation within the council is something that we started last summer, and it was something that initially the working group thought would be achievable by the autumn, but it does need to be achievable by before the next full council, or else before the next annual meeting of the council, or else it will have to wait another full year because of the way the national legislation is framed. So there have been various reasons why there has been a delay in this process, and if the council is unable to even sort out its own internal business within 12 months, it doesn't say very much for the efficient working of this organisation. So I think it's important that we move forward on this, and that will mean that we need to make a decision at the next full council meeting so that we have time to be able to do some consultation before this would be implemented in May. Now, there's a bit more detail to be able to work through that, and I know officers will want to look at that in a bit more thought before we get to next full council meeting. But unless individual groups have had some sight and some priority as to how concerns that some people have raised about the move are going to be met, and we make sure that we have covered all the possibilities and concerns within our discussions, we're not going to make progress on this. This isn't saying it's going to happen, but this is saying that let's put this behind us, one way or the other, at our annual meeting later on this year, or else we'll be talking about it for another 12 months, and we don't want to be held back one way or another by failing to make a change as the national government is doing over Brexit. So we need to keep this moving, and I believe this to be the best way to keep this process moving.
Thank you. Who's speaking now?
Ask if there's any further speakers.
Do we have any further speakers on this subject? Sorry, Councillor Eldred, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think partly I get where Councillor Kerr is going with the amendment, but I just want to refer Council back to the original motion or recommendation that was passed in May, which was to establish a committee system working group tasked with reviewing and considering proposals relating to our governance arrangements. That was the specifics. So actually, what I slightly worry about this amendment is that it actually overturns what we agreed as full council in May. There has been, which was talking about governance arrangements and exploring proposals, which the working group has been doing since that time on a cross-party basis in a sometimes enlightening, refreshing, sometimes incredibly frustrating and irritating way for all of us, I think, but it's a slow process and it shouldn't be rushed. That's my view. If we're going to get our governance right, particularly in a council that's had a lot of criticism for poor governance over a number of years, if we're going to get our governance arrangements right, we shouldn't be pushed to what could be an artificial deadline. And also, I think what we shouldn't do is predetermine the outcome and recommendations of that working group, when actually what council said originally is that we would review our governance proposals, and what this amendment to the report would do, which incidentally, was different to what was agreed at the working group. So the last cross-party working group agreed that we would look at some principles around the governance, we would bring those to full council, but also agreed that before that would happen, that we wanted it to go through council cabinet, partly because that would have an opportunity then for it to go through executive scrutiny, and that the chair of executive scrutiny would then invite every single councillor to be part of that executive scrutiny meeting, so that the proposals that were being put from the working group could get full scrutiny in that forum before they went to cabinet, and then a recommendation could go to full council. The other aspect of it is there also then needs to be a public consultation, and we have agreed that as a working group that is an important step. So I think that the problem for me with this amendment is twofold. Firstly, it completely changes what council agreed to in May in terms of the remit of that cross-party working group, which was about reviewing governance arrangements. It wasn't specifically about a committee system. It boxes that working group in to only looking at one option moving forward, and I think it commits us to a false time frame which doesn't allow us to go through the process which the working group have very carefully considered, and which I personally think are very important steps to ensure that we get these governance arrangements right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My group's more than happy to confirm that we are fully committed to exploring the possibility of moving towards a committee system. We've enforced that by setting up a cross-party working group, which has been running since the last election, almost immediately after the last election, and in which we've not interfered. We've left that group to run, to work towards a conclusion, but I have to say that the anticipation was that what we'd be looking for is a cross-party recommendation on a fully worked out proposal that would give members of this council the opportunity to make an informed decision on whether or not the committee system was the right governance arrangements for this council. I'm under the impression that we're nowhere near that position at this point, from what I'm told, and unfortunately today this amendment or this additional recommendation was only introduced to us 30 minutes prior to the meeting, but in that time I've been made aware of some potential procedural problems in relation to what is being asked for here. Absolutely, this group would look to have principles in relation to moving towards a committee system, including the assumption that there would be no extra meetings, there would be no extra cost, etc., etc. And we would expect a recommendation that fully details how that would be achieved for members, as I say, to achieve an informed decision on it. But moving on from there, what's being proposed is to get it into the time frame that's being proposed is there's only a 4-week period, and for officers to work up that sufficiently detailed proposal for the next full council meeting, which incidentally is the budget meeting, and I have serious concerns as to whether that meeting would have sufficient time to give appropriate time to discuss the details of any proposal. That's one thing. But of more concern to me is the fact that whilst one of the other recommendations takes away the need to hold a referendum, the council would still be bound to do an appropriate consultation. And I would suggest, from what I've heard so far, that 4 weeks consultation with the public on an unworked through proposal would not represent appropriate consultation. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask Mr. O'Connell his views on the consultation period in relation to such things.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there are issues in terms of risk in respect of an insufficient public consultation period here. There are expectations in relation to public consultation when councils are putting forward significant proposals. Our own constitution is being proposed to be amended by the deletion of the need for a referendum, and that mirrors changes to national legislation and brings us in line with national legislation. But very deliberately, there was not a proposal to remove the need for public consultation from Article 15. There is the reference to the referendum in Article 15, but it's important to note there's also a reference to public consultation. So that was deliberately kept in because the working group and officers considered it was an important part of this process. And I would have significant concerns over a very diminished public consultation period as to whether it could be vulnerable to challenge. Mayor, one other issue which I was not able to give definitive advice to either Councillor Poulter or Councillor Kerr this afternoon, very recently before the meeting, was the issue about whether actually you can resolve to make the change at the annual meeting. I would need to review the legislation because my initial understanding is that if you bring this forward for a final decision at this year's annual meeting, effectively it will then come into effect at the next annual meeting. So I'm not sure it gets what Councillor Kerr wants it to get.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So with that in mind, plus the fact that my understanding is that there is no detailed proposal to go to consultation with, I would suggest that this further recommendation is in difficulty. My group have a free vote in relation to this matter, but it's fairly clear to me that as I say, the council's got to be in grave difficulty if we try to pursue this course of action without the expectations and the full recommendation in line with the principles set out being able and available for the public and the council as a whole to consider. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Poulter. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Councillor Eldred, Leader of the Labour Group, and Chris, Leader of the Council, have made some very good points that actually are very pertinent to this debate. There's a couple of things which I'd just like clarity on. Can I just confirm that the amended wording of the amendment is now to confirm that Council are fully committed to exploring a committee? Yeah, okay, that's fine. The final point for me is that it's a shame that this has come so late in the process, because clearly there are legal issues here that we all need to resolve and understand, because I don't fully understand them, and Mr. O'Connell has described there that there's probably outstanding issues that need some clarity as well. So I'm very nervous about this. I don't think actually with that change it necessarily commits us one way or another, but I certainly support the comments of Councillor Eldred and Councillor Poulter in regards to the concerns over pressing ahead with this without due consideration for all the facts and legal standings within this council's constitution.
Councillor Hazelgrave. My issue with the amendment as put forward on the form of amendment sheet, number one, amend Article 15 of the Council's Constitution to remove the requirement that a binding referendum takes place as a prerequisite to any change in governance arrangements. We've heard that national legislation has changed on this. Does that then make that redundant in the Constitution? So do we need to the first point, and it is really is for the monitoring officer, and it's maybe good that there's two heads rather than one tonight. And the other question is, should we decide to amend the Constitution, do we require a simple majority or do we require a two-thirds majority? That's all I wanted to seek clarification on.
Mr. Mayor, the issue on the referendum is it would be possible for Derby City Council to have their own local constitutional requirements. Effectively, that's what Derby's had since the legislation was changed. So yes, Derby could have a requirement for a referendum before governance arrangements are changed, but nationally, on a first change, it is no longer necessary. If you were to change again within a given period of time, you would have to then have a referendum. But as things stand, Article 15 is being amended essentially to match up with the current state of national law. In relation to this, it would be a simple majority. So we need to put it to, if there's no more speakers, we need to put...
If there are no more speakers, we'll vote on the amendment. Thank you. Right. On the amendment as printed, then, all those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'll make that 14. I'll make that 14 for.
Right. Those against?
I'll make that 20, so the amendment's lost.
The amendment is lost. We'll now move to the substantive motion. Do we have anybody who wishes to speak on the motion now, or shall we move straight to the vote? Anybody wishing to speak? All right. All those in favour of the motion as printed, please. Sorry, this is the motion without Lucy's amendment. Are you in favour?
That's carried. Those against.
That is carried. Thank you.
Those against.
Oh, sorry, those against. Sorry. Although, no, that is carried. The next report is on a new proposal for councillor training day. This was discussed by councillors some time ago, and it's laying in the wings waiting to come forward. So who is Councillor Mubarak? Are you going to move this? Item 12A.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I do formally move the motion as it is printed.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Holmes. Right, does anybody wish to speak on this? No? No. All those in favour, please show. Anybody against? No, that's carried. Right, we now move to the motions as proposed in tonight's agenda, which is item 13, which was moved by Councillor Evans and seconded by Councillor Graves.
Mr Mayor, we need to first put whether the council is prepared to accept the alteration to Councillor Evans' motion, which was mentioned in the script earlier on.
What is the change? Sorry. Sorry, as events have moved on, of course, as I said at the start, the motion is not exactly the same as the one we had before. I'm willing to accept that as it now is. Okay, thank you. All right, Councillor Graves, or Councillor Evans, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for allowing the alteration under CP 53 due to recent events. I don't intend to talk very long, really. I did stand and speak about this briefly at the end of the last council session. Really, I want to come from the angle that the decision's been made. We've taken a referendum, and that's done. And now we need to come together. 57.2, it says 58% of Derby population. I believe it's 57.2. We need to give them clear ideas of where we are going as a council. We need to come together and move forward with this. And really, if we don't want to be shackled by the European Union, and if you don't believe that, then go and research the Lisbon Treaty and the consequences of that over the next 5 years. And then you'll realise that we are having our democracy taken off us. So really, I just ask us all to come together and fully support this motion and really leave the EU cleanly. I know there will be some turbulence and there may be some, and we may have opinions tonight, and some of them may be from organisations and different groups, but really, as British people, as the United Kingdom, we really do need to come together now and just go for Brexit. And I really ask the Chamber to support it fully. Thank you.
Councillor Graves, are you speaking now, or do you wish to speak later?
I wish to speak now, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Graves.
I've been quiet long enough. Members of the Council, our country has wasted 2.5 years bumbling through phone negotiations with the EU. There is no determination by government to settle the purest democratic default vote this country has ever had. The business community is resilient, but needs to understand the trading conditions Parliament provides it. We cannot rely on the EU to help us, as its attitude to the Brexit negotiations more than justifies our decision to leave. The EU has persistently failed to negotiate Brexit in good faith, and they are no better than an aggressive bully. To keep us in the customs union and single market is contrary to the real people's vote in 2016. It is not what the electorate asked for, and it is insulting to all those who voted leave to suggest they did not know what they were voting for. David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, wrote to every household and told us what we were voting for. Ever since, our many parliamentarians have sought to thwart that vote, and I include Theresa May, spending 2 years even before revealing an agreement which was wholeheartedly rejected by Parliament. The EU are nothing more than bullies, and it is about time we had people in Parliament that have the bulldog spirit we had in this country during our really low times, such as the 2 world wars and Falklands. Britain needs to stand up to them and be acceptant to leave without a deal if nothing can be gained. The default after the 2016 referendum was that the EU does not fit in with our culture, Mr. Mayor. The EU is a protectionist trading bloc for big business with 13,000 tariffs within the customs union, where food prices are on average 17% higher than they should be. The EU has shamefully weaponized trade. The EU's allocation of resources is downright disgraceful, and the common agricultural policy encourages wasteful overproduction and makes non-EU countries poorer. The EU is a political project that is fundamentally anti-democratic. The purpose of nature of the EU law is contrary to the clarity and precision of English laws. There is the folly of introducing the euro. Britain has consistently opposed this, but would be forced to join. The EU has also inadvertently and dangerously encouraged regional separatist movements. It certainly prefers to talk about a Europe of regions rather than a Europe of nation states. There is also increasing Euroscepticism within the EU itself. Dismissed by populism by Europhiles, you may be familiar with Visegrad, the Visegrad group, comprising of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia, who have challenged the authority of Brussels by refusing to accept migrant quotas imposed by them. The EU has been blamed for the tension between Russia and Ukraine as a result of its 2014 association agreement. So those that argue the EU stops wars are very wrong. And finally, there is massive corruption in the EU. The EU is incapable of reforming itself. It is an institution driven by process rather than outcomes. It is drowning in its own rules, and it is stifling innovation and Europe's future. Our country has fought for over 1,000 years to run our own affairs. Millions have died for democracy. The people of Britain invest their powers in parliamentarians to execute their wishes, not to give it away to other unelected executive powers, or to delay in the hope that that others will scare us into changing our minds. There should be no compromise. The people are not afraid of their decision, only of it not being carried out. The UK must leave on the 29th of March, free from all ties. Mr. Mayor, we need to respect the people's referendum and leave the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any others who wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Kerr and Councillor Poulter. Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
Mr. Mayor, we had circulated to us the new wording, and I attempted to make some amendments to that new wording, but I'm not sure whether there's actually going to be possible to do those amendments because of the sort of the lack of status of the new wording before this meeting.
Do you still wish to move your amendments, Councillor Kerr, or not? Because it's not, they don't really fit with the motion.
Well, I've worked through some Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I've worked through some new amendments with officers which work from the new wording, but I haven't got them. I don't know if they're available to be shared.
Perhaps by way of some assistance to Councillor Kerr, I think we have taken copies of those amendments. They are available. I think, in fairness to Councillor Kerr, I think that in relation to drafting the amendment, I think a mine was originally directed to the original form of motion that was on last time's council meeting. That, with the consent of the meeting, has now been altered to a different format, and I think that's been the struggle that Councillor Kerr has dealt with, and I think there is a danger that the amendment to the motion could be seen as negativing the motion, given the fresh wording of Councillor Evans' motion having been altered. But if the view of the Chamber is that this is an issue that needs debating, then we could accept it, I think, in those terms.
Thank you. Maybe, Mr. Mayor, when people have had a chance to read through, they can decide whether they want to have the debate on the amendment or not.
Mr. Mayor, it's not for the Chamber to decide if amendment is acceptable. If it's not acceptable because it negates the original motion, then we do not discuss it. That is the very point. That's the legal advice, that we can debate anything we like.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's a fair point. I think this council takes quite a liberal approach, for want of a better word, to considering amendments rather than just insisting on negativing all the time. The end product is usually distributed around the table, as opposed to a whole list of deletions and additions that get you to that end product, and certainly that is the approach that I have noted in the time I've been working with Derby, which is actually less, I suppose, technical than I've seen in other councils. The point I'm making is that I think Councillor Kerr has been possibly disadvantaged by the alteration that has been made to the motion that this Chamber has now agreed. And I think there is an issue in relation to whether it could be seen as negativing the motion that Councillor Evans has put forward. And if I'm asked to advise on that, Mayor, I will.
Mr. Mayor, can I just check, as the amendment, you haven't actually clarified if there's a seconder?
Sorry, did somebody just ask a question?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor, myself. Normally, my understanding is if there's an amendment issued, that would be amended and a seconder. Who is the seconder?
So it has been seconded by Councillor Skelton. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment on this? I can't remember the CP numbers, I do apologise, but this amendment just about leaves Councillor Evans' name on it. I would like to know. I'd like to know whether it seems to me very negative to the original motion. It doesn't add to it. It actually completely changes it, and I think that should negate it as an amendment.
I practically come to the same conclusion myself, Councillor Graves. I'm just going to take advice from the monitoring officer, and then I'm probably going to rule it out of order.
Thank you, Mayor. As I've been formally asked in relation to this issue, I actually do consider that it has the effect of negativing the quite clear terms of Councillor Evans' motion as altered. I would have been prepared, I think, to accept this amendment on the original motion, but I think as altered, I think it is very different.
So I'm going to rule that out.
Mr. Mayor, we've allowed Councillor Evans to amend his own amendment, but we're not now allowing Councillor Kerr to do so. It feels somewhat unfair.
Mr. Mayor, in relation to the alteration of the motion from Councillor Evans, that was an alteration. It was put to the Chamber and was accepted by the Chamber. That was one of the early items in relation to this item. I think in relation to Councillor Kerr's motion, It is a question of whether the amendment that she has put around the room is actually in order by not negating or negativing the altered motion. So from that perspective, it's not amending an amendment. What Councillor Evans did was alter his original motion, and he's entitled within the standing orders to ask for that, and the view of the Chamber was that it was acceptable.
Did we vote on that, Mr Mayor?
You don't have to vote. You signified your agreement at the start, so we've done that.
Subconsciously, Mr. Mayor.
Just be quiet. I'm speaking. Councillor Kerr, I'll allow you one more speak, and then I'm going to rule your amendment out of order.
Mr Mayor, I'm going to... Excuse me.
Who needs enemies?
Not much time here, please.
Shut up!
Mr Mayor, I wanted to ask the monitoring officer, if we added onto the end of my proposed amendment the words "or leave on WTO terms," would that undo the negation? So we would then suggest that we want to have the people's vote, including the options to remain or leave on WTO terms.
Councillor Kerr, I'm ruling it out of order, and we'll proceed to a debate. Thank you. Councillor Poulter needs to speak on the motion, and Councillor Kerr. Yes, I'll come back to you, Lucy. Lucy, you've already spoken. You can't speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Referring to Councillor Evans' motion as put tonight, all I have to say really is that the original referendum exposed a rift in this country. If anything, that rift has grown. We're now in a position 2.5 years down the line where, in all honesty, a House in a higher level will have to decide, should have decided on it already, will have to decide on it in the future, and the public's opinion is that they need to get on and do that as soon as possible. In relation to the detail, I have to say that unfortunately I don't think that this Chamber has the ability to make a significant contribution to that decision-making process, and so I'm just standing to confirm really that my group has views on this, as everybody in the country does, and they will be voting according to their conscience with a free vote. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, this motion is nonsense, isn't it? And we can't actually really agree on what we're going to debate, let alone what that debate might be or, in fact, the result. I mean, I know the Brexit negotiations have gone badly, but as far as I'm aware, we've not yet been asked to step in and negotiate on behalf of the UK. But as I have 4.5 minutes, just in case. So I want to give Councillor Evans some credit. 92% of businesses don't trade with the EU. Correct. Probably. It's there or thereabouts. I mean, my hairdresser doesn't, and many small shops, manufacturers, lots of companies don't. But all those businesses operate within the UK economy. And our trade, our global trade, and our trade with our largest single trading partner matters a great deal. Now, the standing order can protect themselves by no longer selling EU booze, but they can't protect themselves from a faltering economy and people having less money in their pockets. And that's why I believe a no deal is an absolute disaster scenario. So let's have some clarity on the EU. The EU is the single largest economic union in the world. It's not just a huge consumer market, but it's also 43% of our exports in 2016. Additional to that, it's a big trading partner. It has 60 other free trade arrangements with other countries, through which we benefit with another 12% of our exports. Starting to look like a bit of a big deal. Now, that doesn't even include the recent agreements with Japan, the ongoing negotiations with New Zealand and Australia, our Commonwealth buddies who want to do a deal with the biggest player in the playground. Now let's look at the World Trade Organization. Now, the World Trade Organization was brought together because tariffs after the Second World War were upwards of about 40% and harmed economies across the world. And so the idea is to have some common principles to bring down those tariffs and encourage free trade. Tariffs still exist, but It's a backstop, not that backstop you're thinking of, a different kind of backstop. But it's still, there are some real problems with it. Tariffs still exist. If we were to introduce WTO and trade with the EU, it's 9% on fish. That fisheries market have a 9% tariff to trade within the EU. 21% on food and drink we want to sell to the EU, and 11% on clothing, okay? And this doesn't cover services, which makes up 80% of the UK's economy. So WTO doesn't do anything for that and leaves us out in the cold with no trade agreements. Now, the other thing is the enforcement of WTO rules is incredibly complex and doesn't really work. It's subverted basically by national governments, which is why we don't get chlorinated chicken and why we don't have genetically modified meats. That's the EU doing that. And also, there's how many countries in the entire world have decided that WTO rules are so great that they'll trade solely on that basis? How many? 0. That's because these are a temporary backstop. Every country in the world that wants to trade goes further than that and has free trade agreements with other countries. And, I mean, we talk about the toxicity of the debate, but when the party who align themselves with Tommy Robinson and leverage this hate so they can deliver a party political broadcast for the next Burton candidate, it beggars belief. We're Derby city councillors, and when Rolls-Royce and Toyota tell us they're worried about no deal, I'm worried about no deal. And we should all be worried about no deal. So you may have, we may be leaving the EU. We may be leaving the EU. And without a deal, it would be a disaster. And that wasn't on the ballot paper. And we all try and pretend we knew what was on there. But everyone in that campaign talked about free trade agreements, EFTA, being Norway, being Iceland. And now it's this nuclear option of WTO, no deal, crash out. Now, you might have convinced 52% of the population on one day that they wanted to leave. But you haven't convinced me. And I don't believe this is in the best interest of Derby. So I won't be supporting this. And the day we do leave, I'll be joining the campaign to rejoin. I won't be a cat's paw for ignorance, basically. And furthermore, I mean, I know what you're trying to do. 58% of Derby residents voted to leave. And you ask me, am I bothered? Do I care that I'm the wrong side of that debate? 58% of people, you ask me, and my answer's simple. No. Je ne regrette rien.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. Sorry, I am informed by Councillor Kerr that she didn't get her full slice of the previous motion, so you've got 4.5 minutes, Lucy.
Thank you. And Jack's just spoken very eloquently on some of the things that I would otherwise have said. But the European Union is a club. The WTO is a club. You don't get automatic membership of clubs. So if we leave without being a member of the WTO, we are not a member of the WTO. We are out in the cold. And that is something that I'm afraid I don't think UKIP have quite absorbed into their minds. As has been pointed out, people choose to be members of trading clubs. We have chosen to be a member of a club called the European Union. We have had full rights within that club. We have set the rules within that club. We have negotiated and we have been making the decisions in that club. If we want them to change, we can ask that club to change its rules. As part of the discussion about whether our rules are right, we weren't given the option to decide what rules we want to change, what rules we don't want to change. And the referendum 2.5 years ago was supposed to be advisory. It was set up statutorily by Parliament as advisory, which is why there wasn't a requirement for a second vote or a supermajority for the change. So we asked advice and people said, we want to change, but we didn't know in what way because the Leave campaign and the various Leave speakers were not speaking in unison about what they thought that Brexit meant. So people voted for many different things. Some voted for strengthening our borders. And we have up border controls. You take your passport with you. It is checked when you come in and out of the country, or particularly when you come in. People talked about the amount of money that the NHS gets. And some people voted for more money for the NHS, but that's not even on the table because we know that if we are not running organisations jointly with other European countries, it is going to cost us more and it's going to be more expensive doing our own business without support from our European partners. And none of this was talked about before, so people voted for the wrong reasons and for the wrong premise at that time. And there were many fears that were voiced by those who understood better about how international trade works. And there were concerns raised about just-in-time. There were concerns raised about how Toyota would be exporting into Europe. And we now know that Toyota is investing in Europe. It's looking at how it can remain selling within Europe, within part of a free trade agreement, which includes exporting from Japan to the rest of Europe rather than exporting from Britain. It doesn't make sensible environmental or economic sense, but if we are outside the free trade area, it will make sense to Toyota, and they will no longer be running the plant as they have been running in Burnaston. You can say the same things about Rolls-Royce, who are moving to do their checks with EASA out of Germany, and they are changing the way they are working to be able to remain within and manage a Brexit situation. We know that even Dyson, who put money into the Leave campaign, is now relocating their headquarters as well. And Sony is doing the same thing. Company after company know that it's bad news. And with their headquarters, with their testing facilities, with their manufacturing, go jobs. And that is our economy. That is our economy in Britain, in Derby, that we are destroying. And that's before you talk about the impact on universities, on medicine, on our NHS. These matter to everyday life for everyday people in Derby, and there is no way that we should be supporting the suggestion tonight that we should drop out into nowhere, as if we have put up a boundary around ourselves, and we no longer care to be part of the world. We no longer want to work with other people to solve the world's problems, and we're going to just somehow become living on a small island, independently of everybody else.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. If there are no others wishing to speak, I'll ask Councillor Graves to sum up. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor, who's that, sorry? Councillor Skelton, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr Mayor, just to say a few things. It's often said by the Leave that they really don't want any more another referendum, people's referendum, on actually putting it to the choice of remaining or actually leaving under the Armageddon method, as that they seem to want, or actually remaining. But it seems Mr Weatherspoon, who has done 48 pages of a leaflet, mixture of business promotion and very jaundiced views on various other people in the political sphere. He obviously thinks there will be another referendum. So I think all of those of us who want to see people have the final say on this, because what we know now, we certainly didn't know in June 2016. Even Mr Weatherspoon seems to agree. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Is there anybody else? Have I missed anybody? No. I apologise, Councillor Graves. It's actually Councillor Evans to sum up. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just respond briefly to some of those items mentioned. Really, Jack mentioned about 92% of businesses in the EU and about restricting and tariffs and so on. Well, Councillor Graves had mentioned earlier, there's over 13,000 tariffs within the EU. It's a bureaucratic monster out of control. And regarding the chlorinated chicken, just because we're outside the EU, are we not capable of making our own laws and restrictions on imports of chlorinated chicken? Is that what you're truly trying to say to me? We can't legislate against importing chlorinated chicken. Of course we can. That's quite simple indeed. And regarding the likes of Rolls-Royce and Toyota, yes, there's bound to be changes. They've got a big market in Europe that they've got to maintain and look after. If this Conservative government hadn't dithered, in my opinion, deliberately dithered and frustrated the process over the last 2.5 years, then we could have been in a much stronger position today to have come to some sort of reasonable agreement with the European Union. I need to go back, really, and just speak a little bit about the history of the European Union. Because we're talking about it being democratic. It's not. It's been mentioned before, it's anti-democratic. That's a fact. Now, I'll just read out a little bit here so you've all got something. And this can be checked. It's public record. In 1972, Edward Heath the then Conservative British Prime Minister, said that we were going to be voting in the European Common Market and stating there are some in this country who fear that going into Europe we shall in some way sacrifice independence and sovereignty. These fears, I need not hardly say, are completely unjustified. Edward Heath's words as British Prime Minister, 72. Right. Edward Heath was lying. For the record, he was lying. And he knew he was lying very well at that time. He was in possession of a letter, this is public record, he was in possession of a letter from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that stated clearly it was to transfer all UK sovereignty to the EU. Heath lied. And these slides have scarcely been mentioned in the 1975 referendum. If the public had known about that when Labour, thank God, gave us a referendum in 1975, I don't think we would have voted to go into the EEC, the European Economic Community, as it was. We were lied to. Heath later said the reason he had to lie was because he considered the British people are too stupid to be involved in governing themselves. That's how we were taken into the EU. I did mention at a previous meeting here about the background of the EU and its first president. Did anybody look that up and have a look at Walter Hallstein, who was a Nazi supporter and sympathiser? It's based on those principles. That is fact. I'm not talking about opinions here, I'm talking about fact. People need to understand this and do the proper research. In 2005, in the Labor Manifesto, we were promised a referendum by Tony Blair, which was then wholeheartedly, he had said in this, to the British people we will put it to the British people in a referendum campaign wholeheartedly for a yes vote, i.e. to remain in. We never got that. It got removed on some technicalities. So that referendum was removed in 2005. We were then promised it again in 2010 by David Cameron with the coalition government and Liberals. And that took 6 years before we finally got the referendum. 6 years from promising it. And only because of UKIP being extremely active and gaining nearly 4 million votes and not having any MPs for those 4 million votes. We voted to leave the EU in its entirety, even if this may involve short-term or even some long-term negatives. If we had wanted a deal or no deal, then we would have got Noel Edmonds involved, wouldn't we? Well, that's my opinion on this. We've got to put aside our differences and get behind Great Britain and the United Kingdom and help a smooth transition on the 29th of March 2019 to orderly and proper full exit from the EU. The EU is like the spiteful big brother. It's trying to punish us because it knows it's in a chance of collapsing. I mean, how many people here know how many people roughly work for the European Union? I'll tell you, 50,000. How many of those 50,000 earn more than Theresa May, our Prime Minister? I'll tell you, over 10,000. Does that sound good? I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of anything associated with the Nazis. Once we've left the European Union, we can once again trade equally and treat people equally from around the whole world, not being part of the EU club, which does discriminate against people outside of the EU. I mean, we mentioned Dyson earlier, but we didn't mention where he'd gone. Singapore. What's wrong with that? Somebody can open a factory up in New Zealand, in Sri Lanka, Singapore, whatever you want. What's wrong with that? That's good. That's world trade. That's what we're about. We want to open ourselves up to the whole world. I may have mentioned before as well, I'm going to finish on this, I've got quite close friends who are Indians and Sri Lankans, and they are discriminated against because of the European Union. They are directly discriminated against because they are outside of the European Union. Let's all grab this chance and take back our control, make our Parliament sovereign once again, and we can all then build a better, brighter future for all of us. Thank you.
Right, we're going to move to the vote then. All those in favour of the motion, please show. All those against, please show. The motion is lost. We'll now move to item 14, which is a motion about car parking charges in district shopping centres. Councillor Bayliss, are you moving?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
This is something that is within this council's control. Thank you, Mr Mayor. When I first heard about this Conservative, UKIP and Liberal Democrat coalition Derby City Council's budget proposal, I instantly knew it was wrong. It was wrong to penalise local people wanting to shop locally. It's wrong because no one has asked for these charges, and it's wrong because there's been no consultation on these charges. It's a bolt of the blue from on part of the UKIP, Lib Dem, Tory budget proposals. It's unwanted, completely unnecessary, and comes at a bad time for traditional retail trade. I did go and speak to local traders because that was my view, and I thought whether they shared it or not. So I did go and talk to the Alveston, Allenton and Spondon traders, and they're all of one mind, basically. Their basic view is that you've got to be joking on this, but of course you're not. It's part of your budget proposals, and of course it does actually roll out to potentially other district centres across the city. So I do hope in terms of the budget feedback, which I know closes tomorrow, this feedback helps. We've got to reflect that in this retail environment, where the British Retail Consortium have reported that Christmas sales were the worst since 2008, this is simply madness. We're talking here not about grade A retail locations, but they're local district shopping centres. The ones where you nipped for a pint of milk or a newspaper, or fantastic cakes, which happen to be manufactured in Derby, actually in Alveston ward. Or you do a top-up shop during the week. These places are massively under pressure, mainly from online sales. Parking charges will penalise all customers of the community district shops. Customers will just click and buy rather than pay the charges. One of the traders I spoke to said to me, and I quote exactly what he said to me, "It's quite frightening that with ongoing reports like this, that a council could ever consider consultation of parking charges in our centres. We totally concede that parking management is required," which in Allenton, where this trader was from, it works adequately. By the way, just so you're aware, traders were also against any suggestion of 1 hour free parking. It creates a problem for people with long appointments such as hairdressers or loan mortgage meetings at banks. It still gives the perception of charging to park. I've not ruled out this could be some sort of budget Aunt Sally put up to be knocked down and hide the fact that the council does charge for parking, and this administration itself has hiked parking charges up for the first time in 4 years, despite what the Conservative Party local election manifesto said. It seems a bit like Lib Demitis to me, that you say one thing and do another. And seemingly with this proposal you've come back for the more local district centres, which is very worrying. There's no evidence that charging would help with customer numbers at any of the district centres, as all their currently waiting limits work just fine. I do find it's a bit odd that the so-called part of business has tabled this, but many of you then have never run businesses, large or small, at any particular level. Let's be honest, this proposal isn't new. It's been a pet project for offices for a number of years. It was suggested at least twice under different Labour administrations. And on both those occasions, Labour councils are very clear. They instructed officers to put it where the sun doesn't shine. It would be stupid to put it into a budget consultation as well. Unless, of course, it is really being used as an answer, and this is being used to hide something else in the budget. I urge Council to support this motion and to say no to district centre parking charges in Alveston, Allenton and Spondon and across the city, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Jackson, you're seconding this. Do you wish to speak now?
Yes, I will speak now. And Mr Mayor, if I may, with your permission, remain seated because I've got a bad leg.
Of course.
Thank you very much.
It's got a bit steamy in here since you pressed your button.
It's not me that steamed it up.
I haven't touched anything.
I never steamed that up. Right.
bother with that.
Okay. Yeah, seem to have attention. Yes, that's fine. Right, well, the Bolton, I'm going to be sort of unapologetically parochial about this, but the Bolton Neighbourhood Board has representatives of traders in Allington on the board, and the current parking arrangements there work perfectly well. And I don't see that there should be any reason for changing them. Any attempt to impose charges will have a detrimental effect on this particular district centre and others. Particularly for the elderly, I can speak for the elderly, I think. It's a bit of a lifeline, these district centres, and particularly Allington is doing very well. People often go there every day when they're old, or at least 2 or 3 times a week, so it would hit them, and well, we all know that they don't really need anything else in these difficult times. I think the whole notion of changing it is really ill-conceived, and it is, well, stupid, and I ask the Council to vote against it for once and for all. Let's get rid of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I have Councillor Graves next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can support this motion in principle. When we on the UKIP benches found out about the suggestion to introduce parking charges in Alveston and Allington, we went straight into action. We set about a manual petition and an online petition, and within a few days we secured over 1,000 signatories. A petition that was non-political, it was a non-electioneering petition, it was not a desperate petition, but a pro-business petition. It was a pro-people petition. We also secured a commitment that if people didn't want any parking charges, they will not be introduced while UKIP councillors exist in Alveston and Allington. What did Councillor Bayliss do? Instead of supporting these actions, he creates a highly politicised petition, one that omits the truth, inferring that UKIP want to introduce these charges when we clearly express the opposite view. When a person knows what another party says and then writes the opposite, is that not a deliberate act of misinformation? Is that an attempt to misguide the public? Is that a desperate act of a politician who will go to any length to get elected? Would the public be right in questioning the integrity of a person that acted in this way? Of course they would. Moreover, did we not think, no, did we not hope that the lessons of the previous administration had been learnt by the Labour group? Did we not hope that despite so many of you were left, the bad influence had come from the last leader? Maybe there was a hope too far. After all, members, you do remember such questionable practice as Councillor Bayliss was engaged in. Remember, it was he who gave the Labour Party agent, James Shires, a pass into this council house, a privilege that only elected members should have. He knew it was wrong, but he did it anyway. Then he let Mr. Banwaite take the flak. What you won't be aware of, Mr. Mayor, is how caring Councillor Bayliss is, in line with Labour Party principles. He cares for the working man. He cares for members and ex-members of the military. I think that's why he reported my son, a hard-working family man, a proud veteran who fought for our country, reported him for delivering UKIP leaflets during my election, supporting his old dad. Not only did he report him, he was asked if he wanted to be anonymous, and his arrogance replied, a big fat no. He was proud that he got my son the sack. He was proud that my grandchildren suffered. That's the sort of man Councillor Bayliss is. Does he really care about car parking charges? I don't think so, Mr. Mayor. He is merely worried about his political skin. This activity, Mr. Mayor, is the same old, dirty Labour Party tactics. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of want to get back to the issue a minute. I'm not really interested in any of the politics, the Coronation Street, any of that of it. I think this is an opportunity for an administration which has called itself pro-business from the very outset to prove that. What would our city be without those small independent traders that operate in areas like the Allington District Centre? You know, I'd invite any of you to come along and I'll walk with you. You'll see businesses that have been there for years and years, and they've never branched out into other areas, but they've always sustained the area and brought a real character to Allington, which I just don't think exists in other places. And if you look at high streets and district centres up and down the country now, you'll see that they're just, you know, what do they call it? Subway, Costa, Greggs. Subway, Costa, Greggs. Subway, Costa, and then sometimes you get a Cafe Nero at the end, just to spice things up a little bit. But we don't want that, do we? We like the fact that we have character on our high streets. And I ask that as a council we send a message now to those traders who, you know, before all the personal attacks started, and, you know, to be honest, the traders out there aren't interested in any of that, from any side, whoever's saying this or saying that. All they want is to be able to run their businesses. So let's let them. You know, this will be disastrous to our district centres, regardless of how we paint it. And I don't think it needs to be politicised, because out there they're not politicising it. They're talking to us individually as councillors, they're talking to each other, and they're organising, and the conversations they're having is that this will not only hurt the businesses, but the people who rely on them. So please, I just ask you to just think again about this, and the invite is there. If you want to fancy coming for a shopping trip on Saturday around Allington with me, I'm not paying, but you're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Kerr.
Can I first say that to Councillor Jackson, it's absolutely fine to be parochial on an issue like this. In fact, I think this is the sort of issue where it's right to be parochial, so don't apologise. You're doing the right thing. Secondly, I'd just like to remind people that actually in 2008, one of the main issues in the 2008, I know that's 10 years ago, election, was the threat of parking charges going into areas such as Littleover. And we in Littleover, parochial issue, really understand the concerns that people had about that threat. And actually I think the threat is actually greater now, because of the way the high street has changed. And our district centres are mini high streets. They are still really important. However, there's also another pressure, and it's a pressure that has arisen partly because the parking charges elsewhere has gone up. And that is the balance between people who are catching the bus from the district centre into the city centre. And I can't judge for how other local areas operate on this, and it's been really useful hearing people comment on how it is in Allington, in Alveston and so on tonight, because they're not places I go on a daily basis, though I know that Allington thrives because of the number of people who walk there from Rolls-Royce, and if we lose Rolls-Royce it will hit Allington no end. So things like that matter. The local knowledge really matters. But in 2008, we managed to throw it out. We didn't have parking charges imposed in Littleover and some other places, and that was the right decision. And if it's the right decision not to have them in Alveston, Allington and Spondon, then I'm quite sure that the people in those areas will be telling you that, because that is what the instinct is. So we do need to solve our problems with people parking and riding from district centres into town. But I don't think the way to do it is by introducing parking charges, unless there are people out there clamouring for the parking charges. And once people start organising petitions for parking charges, we'll know we need to listen. But at the moment, they're not happening.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So earlier on, I saw Councillor Graves walking across to the council house with his tripod in his hand. I was wondering what he was doing with that, and it's obvious now exactly what he was doing with that. So just responding briefly to that rant, back in May this year, when the threesome of councillors, Councillor Poulter, Councillor Graves and Councillor Skelton, were all over the press bandishing bits of paper like this, implying there was a coalition agreement, they'd got their heads together to work for the city, any reasonably minded person would have thought that they've come together, they've discussed some tangible policies and some projects that they want to implement in the city. Therefore, again, it'd be reasonable and right for each of the coalition partners to take responsibility for the administration's work. Alan, Ruth, call it a coalition, a supply and demand agreement, what you want to call it that. But you are the DUP of this council. It's absolutely appalling, and particularly with Councillor Graves, time after time since May this year, demonstrating his hypocrisy and total lack of integrity. He spouts one thing in this chamber, whether full council or exec scrutiny, and then shows no shame whatsoever in reporting a different version of events outside to the media. He attacks the integrity of Councillor Bayliss, the one councillor who supported Alan Graves' attempt to become the Labour group leader. The one vote he got in that contest, and a few years later now, he's attacking him. Other examples, I mean, just last week, executive scrutiny. There's a vote. He's opposed the plans. He's shown grave concern, apparently, about the plans for the assembly rooms, but he has the chance at executive scrutiny to do something about it, to vote for a call-in. Yet, as the chair, with the casting vote, he sits on his hands. Voting to have certain meetings in private when there's an audience, and yet when that audience isn't there, he's happy to make sure them meetings are in private. Put an audience here. Oh yes, we demand these meetings to be in public. It's just purely for his own personal gain. He votes to terminate the waste contract, and when he could do something about that, he doesn't. He could have...
Yes, hang on a sec, just a minute. Councillor Shanker, you're not really directing your remarks to the question under discussion, which is car parking charges. Car parking charges.
I'm getting there, Mr. Mayor, but again, Lucy and yourself didn't seem to have a problem when Councillor Graves was making these points. So I think I'd just ask you to be fair, Mr. Mayor. He continues to prop up this administration whenever the agenda suits him. If he's really against car parking charges, why, instead of the petition, he doesn't need to do a petition. He needs to sit down with his coalition partners and get the idea taken off the agenda completely. Having said all that, one thing that does astound me is the objection Councillor Graves has to any political party's literature. The literature come out from UKIP over the years under his leadership has been nothing short of disgraceful. Councillor Graves, you put this administration into power. If you're really against car parking charges, take some of that responsibility and do something about it. If they didn't consult you, that's not our problem. It's not the city's problem. It's a problem that you've got in your coalition. And if it's your opinion that they don't like, then again, it's a problem within the coalition. You can do something about this. You don't need to do a petition. You need to sit down with your coalition partners and stop this crazy idea. It's easy as that. But you're the one who's electioneering here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shanker. Councillor Smale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just try and bring this motion back on track. I'd like to submit an amendment to the motion, please, which I think is going to be circulated around. If you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, I would like to continue. I understand this is a very hotly debated topic from both sides, both from Councillor Graves and Councillor Bayliss. It has been mentioned various times by Councillor Poulter about the plans and exploration of it. This is a budget consultation at the end of the day. Now, Councillor Graves, you can be forgiven under the previous administration. Whenever a consultation was submitted, it was normally regardedly ignored. So when budget's put through, what your opinion would have never have mattered. We have stated on various occasions, if the need is not there, then it won't go ahead. And I'm going to be berated for saying this, but this is a tool in a toolbox. This is something that can be deployed if it is needed. If businesses around your districts do not require any changes to the current schemes, then it will not go ahead. Now, I'd like to thank Councillor Graves, because Councillor Graves actually approached me first about this and expressed his concerns towards me about this parking proposals, as so did the representation from the Spondon Traders Association. But Councillor Bayliss, you offered no opinion to me about these parking charges. You just went straight out and didn't even come and see me about these issues. So actually, I feel Councillor Graves took on the issues of the residents and traders because he spoke to me directly with those issues. So just to reiterate that this is a consultation on the budget proposals for parking facilities, and we will look at all options available to help parking in district centres. Now, clearly, the debate suggests that we do not need parking in some of those parking facilities in those wards, but if traders do have issues with parking problems, then we're happy to facilitate something of this manner, if it helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smale. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Poulter, do you wish to speak now? Do you wish to speak now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will speak now because I think we need to bring this discussion back to reality. At the end of the day, it has gone down in style and it's resulted in the latest of Mr. Bayliss's election issues, policies and discussions. He was, however, right on one thing. This idea or this issue was raised by officers. It was certainly raised by officers to us, and I'm interested to hear that it's been raised by officers at least 2 previous years to the previous Labour administration. The difference is that on this occasion, rather than telling the officers to stick it where the sun don't shine, we gave them the required respect to listen to what the issue was and give them the opportunity to address the issue by coming up with a proposal that addressed whether or not there was an issue in particular areas and what they were going to do about it. And that, Mr. Mayor, is a significant difference between the way that this administration treats officers in this council. At the end of the day, what I would suggest the better way forward for members in relation to this consultation, and it is a consultation at this point, I'm going to suggest and tell you what the appropriate response we put in from Spondon, because, and I've been interested, Councillor Bayliss, to hear who you spoke to from Spondon Traders Association, because 2 or 3 years ago, the issue of overstay and a long all-day parking at the one public car park in Spondon was raised, and as a result, the local neighbourhood board and the Spondon Village Partnership decided to examine and carry out our own inquiries into what the extent of the issue. We monitored car parks for a number of days, took registration numbers and identified how many vehicles were and weren't parking all day long stay in the car parks. The evidence that came out of that was that yes, there was a small problem. Some of that was traders themselves parking all day long, and a couple of them were members of the public parking and using transport into the city centre. But the conclusion, Mr. Mayor, was that it wasn't sufficient a problem to warrant taking any direct action on it. As a result, the neighbourhood board decided that and spoke to the traders who were parking all day long and looked at other measures of improving parking within the city. That was the appropriate way forward then, and it would be the appropriate way forward now, because as a result of this consultation, Spondon Traders, forgot to tell you this, Councillor Bayliss, if you ever spoke to them, that what they've done is submitted the evidence that they had from a year or 2 ago to the consultation as their evidence for not pursuing this course of action. And I'm actually quite confident that Councillor Smale and the officers will consider that evidence and take the appropriate decision and decide that no such action is necessary in Spondon. Rather than going off on political speeches and petitions and stuff, do something useful, Councillor Bayliss. Help the officers to evidence if it is or isn't a problem in your particular area. And as has been said, no imposition will be made in relation to parking in these district centres unless there can be value identified and agreed with the businesses and the traders in that area. And as a result, you've been presented with an amendment to the motion which clearly says that any local measures that aim to improve or enhance parking facilities will be fully consulted upon. That is happening. Only to be progressed and delivered where there is support to do so, where there's a positive outcome from doing it. And as that is the pledge from this administration, from the officers, and that's what we will do. So Council recognises that to do otherwise would have a detrimental impact on the reliability or the viability of these much treasured district centres. So get your act together, do the response to the consultation properly, and help officers understand whether there is or isn't a problem. And please, if you ever get a chance again, and in your day-to-day contact with the officers of this council, please give them the respect that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Start this amendment debate.
Councillor Eldred.
Yeah, aside from whether or not I think this amendment should actually be accepted, given the substance of it, but we'll come to that in a minute. They're really nice words, Councillor Smale, and I think, you know, I'm sure you're seeking to try and reassure the public of these wards about what the future of their district centre. What's worrying, though, is that you're doing that and saying that no parking charges will be imposed unless there is agreement or a need, and yet in your budget proposals for 2021 you have put a £60,000 a year saving specifically related to district centre car parking charging. So are you saying that if you go around every single district centre in the city, including areas like Littleover or Mackworth, and none of those areas say that there is a need for car parking charging or restrictions, then you will not be able to achieve that budget saving, and as such you should probably remove that from your budget proposals along with your amendment. I have to say as well that, you know, consulted upon from this administration probably means a Facebook poll, given your previous consultations, and actually I think the residents of Derby are not going to have a lot of faith in that if that's the way that you consider that you're going to carry on consultations from now onwards. But are you going to say that you'll remove that 60,000 from the budget proposals, because based on your amendment here you cannot possibly hope to achieve that budget saving?
Thank you. Councillor Eldred, can you switch your microphone off, please, Lisa? Thanks. I've got Councillor Skelton first. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this amendment certainly improves matters. I was just thinking, compare and contrast that with what happened in 2007-8, when the then councillor, now Mr. Banwaite, was the cabinet member. We made many representations about the unsuitability of Littleover District Centre for parking charges, but our pleas fell on deaf ears. So I think this is definitely the way forward, to go by consent. If there is not a need for charging, I mean, if it was totally clogged up with people, commuters effectively parking and riding there for, say, several hours a day, then I think a lot of local people would say, well, actually we want to solve that problem. But it looks like there is not a problem, and certainly not a big one like that. So it would, to actually impose parking charges would really be a sledgehammer to crack an extremely small nut.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I'd like the ruling monitoring officer, because in my opinion this amendment completely negates my motion, which talks about car parking charges and not imposing them. That's the first thing.
I've considered this amendment when it came in this afternoon. In my opinion, it does not negative the motion. I think it essentially adds to the motion and elaborates upon it.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in my opinion, it replaces the motion, and as such, it loses the emphasis in the fact that people do not want parking charges. And as Councillor Eldridge says, that within the budget, the implied budget, we've got £60,000 savings line, which indicates that to get that cash, you've got to get it somewhere. And the only way you can get it, in terms of the way it lies, is by imposing parking charges. And if it's not district centres, then where is that money going to come from? That's fundamentally the issue there. But this particular amendment I would not accept as such.
Question for you to accept it in the meeting. So it's a matter for you to rule whether it's in order or not.
No.
My advice is in order.
Yeah, I am advised that the amendment is in order, and that was my opinion already, so we'll continue. As I have no other speakers, I intend to move...
Councillor Evans.
Oh, Councillor Evans. Sorry, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to recap a little bit on Councillor Anderson. I'm in virtually full agreement with him, really. He's talking common sense. He's talking what we need in Alveston and Allenton. I suppose for his ward, particularly Allington. And Allington is a successful trading centre. We've already been blighted with too many buildings that are empty and shops that have turned into takeaways or charity shops, although they are good, but there's too many of them. I can remember growing up in Alveston as a lad, and there was every shop you could think of. And now it's nowhere near as it was. And anything we do has got to enhance the local areas of Allington and Alveston and others around the city as well. So we do have to be very, very careful if we are going to try or want to introduce charges of parking or whatever. I'm against it, always have been, always will be, for the record. I don't want to support anything that protracts and stops stimulation of business in the local centres. It's vitally important. Even if we need to save 60,000, we've got to find other novel ways. And there might be some way, this is me speaking off the cuff, if people are parking and riding, it might be there can be some sort of monitoring system in place for a small cost where we look at those that do park there more than 2 hours could be liable to charges. I don't know. But I commend Councillor Anderson on his speech, really. And really, we need to come together on this and make sure it doesn't go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'm going to take Councillor Anderson now as the last speaker on this amendment. Thank you.
Just want to commend Councillor Evans on his good judgment. I think, it's very clear. These two motions do very different things. So the amendment, the motion will just change completely. What Councillor Bayliss and Councillor Jackson are saying is that we will not introduce parking charges. And if you're sat there thinking you would quite like to never see parking charges in your district centre, you should vote down this amendment. Because this amendment still leaves power on the table to introduce it anywhere where they feel that they have received enough consultative information to make it viable. And we all know that, consultations aren't always the most watertight thing. And I think we need to be very careful with that. And what I wouldn't like to see, and I would never accuse anyone of this, I wouldn't like to see a situation where parking charges were only introduced in areas where it wasn't politically sensitive to do so. So I ask people to think about that as they vote for this amendment. Thank you.
I'm going to move to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against? Councillor. Okay, we'll now move to vote on the motion as amended.
No, the amendment was carried.
The amendment was carried, yes. Do we have any more speakers on the main motion?
Yes, it's got a right to reply.
You've got a right of reply, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just deal with a couple of issues to start with. I don't really need lectures from a member of a party that's toxic that even Nigel Farage has left it. And a £350 million bus side, I seem to remember, wasn't delivered after 2016. And for the record, people may have noticed I'm not a Ranjit bandwagon. In fact, in September 2016, you might have noticed even better. I'm sorry that Councillor Graves' son lost his job. But when I have made complaints about people, I don't hide behind my anonymity. I actually stand up and say things. And if you deliver leaflets around Alveston in front of me and other Labour Party members driving your Eon van with a tracker in it, you have to be plain stupid, don't you really? And advised by somebody that should know better, but obviously is not, which explains why Councillor Graves has made complaints against me to the monetary officer, the fact that Councillor Graves doesn't know they shouldn't park in the car park before 5:30, and to the Police Professional Standards Department, for which there is no foundation in fact. But then that's just a bitter and twisted individual that Councillor Graves is. And for the record, I did actually vote for him to be leader of the Labour group, and we had 2 votes, mine and his. Talking more substantially, this is about parochial issues that actually this council can do something about, finally and thankfully today. I don't agree with the amendment. I understand why you tabled it, don't get me wrong. My view is that we will campaign over this. I'm pretty certain that this is an Aunt Sally and it will be taken out of the budget. And if that happens, I'll be content. I will also be content with the fact that Councillor Graves has to realise, as Councillor Bakishenko has said, that actually he's part of this coalition. And one or two things could have happened. Either he should have been consulted about it, and it shows maybe he is a very junior partner in this relationship, or that he actually didn't bother asking him about it in the first place, which I actually think is even worse, frankly. But he is responsible. He cannot be on both sides of the fence. And I do remind him of one final thing before I sit down. In the last judgment, we had this little legal spat across the road. Paragraph 117 talks about literature for people taking off particular styles of literature. This talked about a Labour news thing. And we need to make sure that he clearly understands that when we put petitions out, we clearly state who we are, we make sure it complies with the law, and we do it the right way. Now, he might not do that, but we do. And that's why it says Labour, and that's why I'm proud to be a member of the Labour Party, and it's why I'm proud to be here representing people in Alveston and Allington, and actually from the traders I spoke to at Spondon. This is about a budget consultation, which actually ends tomorrow. I'm quite happy for this to move to the vote, Mr Mayor, but that's my contribution done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayliss. Right, we'll move to the vote. All those in favour of the motion as amended? He's voted this time, hasn't he? Okay, thanks. All those against? Sure.
Yeah, 22 against.
So it's carried.
The motion's carried.
The amended motion is carried. I'll now move on to motion 15, which is maintenance improvement of road network, to be moved by Councillor Repton.
Councillor Repton, can we just confirm this, you're putting this forward as an alteration under CP 53? Yeah, okay. Shall I read it out, Mr Mayor? Unfortunately, it's handwritten and it's just been handed in, but I'll read it out to the Chamber. The intention, I believe, is to replace the final paragraph of the motion at item 15 with the following. Otherwise, the rest of the motion's the same. So the alteration would be, Council therefore calls on the Cabinet to secure the funds necessary to invest in the maintenance and improvement of Derby's road networks and to work with the LGA to lobby government for funding to meet this need.
Is it the view of the meeting that we can accept this change? Yeah? And I don't see any dissenters. Do you? Yeah?
Just without debate.
Without debate, that is, yeah. Okay, right. We'll move on the motion as altered. Councillor Repton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2017, Highways England had 10,589 potholes reported. Last year, that rose by almost 50% to 15,524. The number of repairs to cars damaged by potholes in 2017 was 14,104. This rose by almost 50% to 22,862 in 2018. The total amount of compensation paid for damage by potholes was £81,500 in 2017-18, rising to a staggering £329,379 in 2018-19, a very worrying 400% increase. Over the last 11 years, there have been 395 cyclists killed or seriously injured by potholes in our country. This is a scandal and is totally unacceptable. 9 out of 10 drivers, 88%, say our roads are worse than 10 years ago. 67% of drivers believe that their roads have considerably deteriorated since 2008. Every 15 seconds, work starts on repairing a pothole somewhere in the country. Here in Derby, we need much more action and investment to get on top of the £200 million backlog in work to repair the potholes. All the figures contained in my speech are from either the RAC, the AA and other reputable sources, including Derby City Council's Insurance and Risk team, who have supplied some very interesting and useful statistics. Potholes cost drivers in our country £915 million in repairs, with over a quarter of all drivers having suffered pothole damage over the past year. 70% of drivers have personally hit at least one pothole per week over the last 12 months. The £915 million car repair bill is a 34% increase on the 2016 figure. The average cost to each motorist being approximately £110, with 8.2 million car drivers suffering damage by potholes last year alone. 1 in 5 local roads are classified as structurally poor, which is a 20% increase in just 1 year. Over 500,000 potholes were reported to local authorities, with a 44% increase in less than 2 years. Across 161 councils, 512,270 potholes were reported by members of the public, which was up from 356,000 a year earlier. In Derby, after doing a comprehensive survey over a 6-month period, the Labour Party has found that potholes are the most complained about problem in the city, with local people feeling that the number of potholes, just like nationally, are increasing, whilst the action to address the problem is decreasing due to a lack of resources. So what are the Conservatives nationally and locally doing about that problem? And what's happening in the city? Sadly, too little, too late. In Derby, we have a backlog of work which needs approximately £20 million worth of capital investment, and then at least £5 million each and every year just to keep on top of the problem. In Derby, in 2018, the total value of pothole-related claims was £214,539. And over the 5 years to 2018 in Derby, there were a staggering £1.26 million worth of claims against this city council. So, what has Derby received, you may ask, from the central government to address these massive problems? A mere £982,000, which is less than a 20th of what is required, as there are £20 million worth of backlog to be done. Woefully, this is inadequate, and without an urgent injection of tens of millions of pounds, the dire and unacceptable situation for cyclists and motorists alike will continue, with all costly accidents and damage associated with such underinvestment. What a state of affairs we have in this city. This totally inadequate response by this Conservative Council and this Conservative government will fail to address the scale of problems, leading to further anger, frustration and financial loss to tens of thousands of Derby citizens. This council must act now and ensure that the necessary resources are put in place to address this very worrying problem in our city. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. Councillor Froggatt, you're down to second it.
Yes, I'll second and I'll speak now, please, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Earlier tonight, Councillor Smale answered a question and there were 125 roads needing maintenance in the next 3 to 5 years and 40 roads need treatment now. And that's one ward. That is one ward. Of all the wards we have, I don't know any wards, and that includes all political parties, that don't have potholes. We all have potholes. And at the moment we decide, well, the officers decide whether they're, how deep do we have to fill them? Are they content to leave them for a little bit so we can bump up and down? Or do we leave them further until we break the wheel? Which one is it? You know, our residents deserve to ride round on roads without doing any damage whatsoever to their cars and vehicles. It's just ridiculous. So can we please have some funding that we know you've got to help our residents, please?
Thank you, Councillor Froggatt. I have Councillor Holmes now.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have an amendment to the motion which I will pause for a little while people have that distributed to them, please.
Right, Councillor Holmes, do you have a seconder? Councillor Mail, thank you. Councillor Holmes. Monitoring officer, have a read of that and then we'll get a decision. Thank you.
I've viewed the proposed amendment before. I think it's intended that it remains the proposed amendment despite the alteration of the main motion, and I do not believe it negatives the original motion.
Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Smale will have some more detailed views on this as the relevant cabinet member, but I speak on behalf of leadership on this. If we take things back to 2010, myself and Councillor Poulter as the relevant cabinet members back then, when we formed a minority administration, worked very hard to actually address the LTP that we inherited from the Liberal Democrat administration. Now, I won't get into an argument with Councillor Kerr on what her priorities are, and I'm sure she'd stand by the LTP priorities that were in place when we inherited them. But we flipped them on their head. Basically, we came in determined to make sure that roads maintenance was the absolute highest priority in terms of the LTP. Now, that has continued, it's fair to say, actually, with the Labour administration that took over from us in 2012. And, of course, now we inherited the LTP as was, which was still a very high priority for highways maintenance. So, you know, we have always had that as one of our transport priorities and always will, because we recognise the importance of a quality road network, but we also recognise as well that there's far more to do and that we need more funding. That is obviously something which cross-party we all agree with. The amendment recognises that between 2010 and now, government have actually given Derby City Council, I believe, between 2 and 3 million. I've got some of the figures, but I didn't have time today to actually add it all up. But I do believe, if I'm wrong, it can be corrected, but between 2 and 3 million pounds of extra funding above and beyond any core grants with regards to dealing with winter damage on a year-to-year basis. So it is recognised, the amendment does recognise that, but it also recognises and strikes a balance to recognise that there is funding to be required. It's a recognition of our commitment to ensuring that this issue is taken forward as a high priority. And it's also a commitment to us seeking further funding from central government to deliver what we all want for this city, which is a high-quality road network. There's some good work within the council that's being done to secure many millions of transport funding, and we've been very successful historically to do that. We're making huge inroads in terms of sustainable travel, but this administration would like to balance that with improvements to the core network too, to ensure that road users such as cyclists and motorists and buses have a quality network to operate on. So the amendment is what it is. I think for those reasons I've just given, I think it's a solid amendment to the original motion, and I would like councillors to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Councillor Smale, you're down to second this. Are you speaking now? Or thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Repton, Councillor Froggatt, if you speak to your colleagues who sit on the scrutiny board for communities, they will know that I did write a letter to the Department for Transport already, as required by the board from the exec scrutiny. I did write to them to explain the situation with our road surfacing. I don't think there is no great shakes in terms of that we all agree that we do need more funding for our roads. And we do have an excellent highways team that do work extensively to look at the conditions of our roads. Our repudiation rates on insurance claims are very high, and we've obviously, in a few cabinet meetings ago, released a report that details how we prolong road surfaces and how we maintain and inspect them. But I would like to bring back the Labour group back to March last year, when £1.8 million of capital budget for highways disappeared and moved somewhere else. So the commitment from the previous administration on the road surfacing was obviously not very high. This administration is focused on highways, and I am going to meet with the Department for Transport and will be lobbying the government to help bring more funding to Derby for our road network. So I please accept the council, please, to support this motion, and I will do everything as I can to speak to the Department for Transport and hopefully bring more money back to the city. Thank you.
Councillor Repton.
Yeah, Councillor Holmes said he was determined to get on top of the problem. Well, you're not being very successful. And Councillor Smale said he's written to the government. Well, what did they come back with? Come back with 982,000. And you know, the people out there know, £20 million is required just to get on top of the problem, and £5 million each and every year. I would urge every member of this council, if you really are concerned about your constituents, then you would be supporting my original motion and not this amendment. If you don't support this amendment, then I and my group will certainly make sure the tens of thousands of people who each and every day suffer damage to their cars, and those cyclists are in risk of damage to themselves and injury, and even worse, will be made aware of your complete complacency to this problem in the city. The only way to support this motion is by unitedly working together to get additional resources into this city. If you don't support my original motion, unamended as it is, then we'll certainly make sure the people of Derby know exactly where you stand. And that is, you don't give a damn about them and the damage caused to them and their families each and every day.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. Councillor Kerr.
Can I just refer back to the start of this debate where we had an amendment to the motion that we had on the papers before us, an alteration which we accepted as a council, which strengthened what was there on the papers. And if it hadn't been changed like that, we had an amendment prepared to move that forward. What we have now is a significant weakening of what has been put to us. It's fine going and talking to one-to-one with a minister, with Secretary of State even, but That's not what's needed. What is needed is a movement across the country, the realisation that our infrastructure needs investment. And that needs to come not from an individual council. And Derby is big, but it's not that big. It needs to come from across the movement of local authorities, which means the LGA. And introducing the importance of the LGA into the motion that we had presented to us made the difference. That is what we need to do. There needs to be an acceptance that for local government, roads are a key infrastructure, and they're a key infrastructure that needs investment. They have been underinvested in, not just for the last 8 years, but from before that. And we need to get the investment in place. It's not easy, it's a real challenge, and Brexit doesn't make it any easier. But if we don't address this, we're going to turn into a third world country, not just in Derby, and it's not just an appeal for Derby, it's an appeal for all the households across the country, because we drive, not just within the city, we drive beyond it. All councils need more funding, all wards need more funding, and almost all our streets need more funding.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Poulter.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I actually wondered why the last-minute amendment came in from Councillor Repton at one point, but Councillor Kerr's just clarified why that was the case. It's obvious that Councillor Kerr felt that she would be able to support the motion if it mentioned the word LGA. In actual fact, we would be quite happy to include the word consultation with LGA because we're already doing it. We've already done that in many forums throughout the LGA, and we'll continue to do so. At the bottom line here is that we are actually, through the budget process and through looking closely at the finances, at what we had inherited in terms of a highways transport maintenance budget from the previous administration. We're looking at that very closely and doing our best to replenish the £2 million plus, which was removed in March last year from that budget. So it's a little bit disingenuous of the Labour administration to come quoting that we need to put money into this when they removed that significant amount last year. The only other thing I would like to remind Council is that we and our local MPs, our local Conservative MPs, were successful in negotiating with the Highways Agency a scheme of investment, serious millions of pounds of investment in the A38 works, which will be coming very shortly and will make a significant difference to the quality of the roads in this city. And that was done by members of my party. At the end of the day, this is a major scheme of investment that's coming, and I'd just like to mention to full council that I will actually be speaking to the Transport Minister very, very soon, and this will be amongst a number of items on the agenda to raise with him. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. I don't have any other speakers on the amendment, and therefore I'm going to move to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? Amendment is lost. I'll now return to the motion. Yeah. I think I originally had Councillor Ashburner to speak on the main motion. Do you still wish to speak, Councillor Ashburner? Yes.
Having worked with Having worked with Leicester City Council Highways Maintenance Department, there are ways of being very efficient about highways and maintenance. I haven't worked with Derby City Council. I don't know how they work. I've supported people who have had problems having hit potholes, and there's a real need for more government money. And the local Local Government Association is the ideal independent body to provide that support, and therefore I support this motion. Thank you.
Right, we'll move to the vote then. Those in favour of... Councillor Repton, you have to sum up, sorry.
Yeah, very quickly. Sadly, there seems a complacent attitude from the group opposite to this major problem facing tens of thousands of our citizens here in Derby. A problem that they're demanding that we take action over. And I think we need to listen to them. It's not me, it's what the public is saying to us quite clearly. Tens of thousands each and every day, they're either personally damaged or their cars damaged. And I think we mustn't fail them. What we want more of, Councillor Smale, is not looking into these holes, it's actually filling them in and repairing them pretty damn quick, before further damage and further loss is caused to those tens of thousands of people. Those who fail to support this motion this evening fail every single one of their electorate. I welcome the support from the Liberals opposite, and that's why I was prepared to make an amendment to this motion. I urge you all, if you're really interested in your electorate, please support this motion. Thank you.
Right, we'll move to a vote on the motion then, please. All those in favour of the motion, please show. Okay, those against? The motion is carried then. We'll now move to motion 16, which is the swimming pool complex. Thank you. That's to be moved by Councillor West. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Following submission of this motion, I was pleased to see plans and costings released to the Derby Telegraph. Unfortunately, in their rush to release these, the Cabinet member seems only to have released figures for the previous administration's plans, not quite the big splash we asked for. Derby deserves better. Residents deserve to know timescales for building. Those residents in my ward who live at the back of the site, excuse me, those who would use the facility for their health and fitness, those who would train there, those swimmers who deserve outstanding facilities, especially following Councillor Poulter's comments about Queen's Leisure Centre nearing the end of its life. Excuse me. In the spirit of openness and transparency, I would ask Council to support this motion so that those residents, those swimmers, those people we represent, those possible future Olympians can be given assurances that Moorways will be rebuilt, that Osmaston will be the home to fantastic facilities, that funding, no matter how much the costs involved, as we still await even an estimated figure, will be available, despite 13 million being diverted to clean up the assembly rooms. I'm aware that we've heard tonight that details will go to Cabinet next month, but this has been said several times since October. We're currently 7 months behind the previous build schedule at who knows what cost. I would rather see Council backing than empty promises.
Thank you, Councillor West. Now I need another seconder as Councillor Raju is not here. Is that you, Councillor Shanker? Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll formally second and reserve my right to speak.
Right, okay. Councillor Grimmadell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to bring forward an amendment to the motion. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Grimmadell, I'm told that Councillor Holmes is seconding your amendment, so if you'd like to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All of our plans, Mr. Mayor, for the new swimming pool facility at Moorways was announced to the media last week. So this Labour's motion is old news, outdated and stale. And together with the Lib Dems and UKIP, this party has a greater vision for the swimming pool. We have increased the size of the leisure water pool hall by 2/3 and have increased the market for the young people up to the age of 15. We have introduced an exciting and differentiated mix of activities and 2 attractions currently not installed elsewhere in the UK. And that is the Wow Ball and the Wave Slide. Our aspiration is for an enhanced leisure scheme which will offer better value for money. The following facility mix includes an activity leisure pool with an integral Wow Ball, an extended beach area and a wet deck incorporating an adapted version of the play unit and range of repositioned water features. A wave slide for use with 1 or 2 persons, tubes, race slides and 2 enclosed body slides for a single rider and a double rider. It's a vision of this administration to keep the 50-metre swimming pool facility at Moorways and enhance the leisure water design. That's the vision of this administration. It will become a destination visit for all Derby swimmers, Mr. Mayor, and for those living far afield. Mr. Mayor, this is a time for keeping one's tool in one's toolbox, and that is what this vision and forward thinking is all about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Holmes, you reserve your right to speak. Do we have any other speakers? Councillor Poulter.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. There's been reference to the fact that the only figures included in this so far relate to the previous administration's recommendation or proposals. As has been made clear, the full details will be disclosed in the Cabinet meeting in February. But it was included, the previous administration's figures were deliberately included because at the end of the day, the financial framework that was provided before was up to £33 million. Since we took control of the council, it became immediately obvious that that was not achievable. The proposal that was being put forward was not achievable within that figure. It became apparent that it was at least £4 million more than the 33 that was proposed. As a result, this administration's had to work on value engineering the cost of that proposal down, but it wasn't possible to get that figure down back to the £35 million. It stands at 35 point something million pounds. So the previous administration's proposal, which was inadequate for the city, was poorly costed, poorly worked through, and a poor proposal. In actual fact, had we not intervened in this, would probably still not be ready to be able to, because they would have had to come back to council for more money, because that's the way that they had pitched it. And it was included for that reason. But ultimately, what we're saying to this city and this council is that we will find the funding to provide a suitable facility for the city, a facility that we can be proud of, a facility that's fit for purpose and commercially viable. And that's what this administration will do for the city in relation to the swimming pool. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Councillor Metre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to support this amendment. I mean, as I put in my question earlier on, in 2009, the Liberal Democrats proposed this £50 million strategy. We're 10 years on now, and basically I think the message is saying, you know, residents of Derby need a pool. We know Queen Street is going to be out of order soon. It's going to be out of function. So let's just get on with it. I'm happy to support it. And if we get those commitments by February, that's good.
Thank you, Councillor Nater. Councillor Eldred.
Just think that I think councillors should think very carefully before supporting this amendment and welcoming the recently released plans. You know, we have a responsibility as councillors when it comes to looking at plans and what we agree to and what we don't agree to. And I cannot imagine that it would be responsible for us as a group of councillors in this room to say that we welcome plans that we've seen no costing for, we don't know where the funding is coming from for, and we don't know what the time frame is and therefore the impact on residents and how long people are going to have to wait for this. So I just would caution people in terms of our responsibility as councillors before you vote on this as to whether or not it's actually advisable for us to do that without having all of the relevant information in front of us. And just a word of caution, Councillor Grimmadell, in terms of new technology, the last time the Conservative administration signed off on a new piece of technology for the city, we ended up with the Sinfin incinerator. So just a word of caution about things that don't appear in other parts of the UK.
Hang on a sec. Councillor Hazelgrave.
Mr Mayor, fellow councillors of Derby City Council, we aren't here in a parish council meeting discussing whether to put a paddling pool on the green of the village on village fete day. We're actually talking about a much bigger issue, and we do need to be giving the facts to the people and not kind of drip feeding it as it's been done. This administration came in to talk about being transparent. Well, there's not a lot of transparency here. Talking about what Labour's figures were, etc., and things have moved on, etc. We don't even know if it's a 10-lane pool at the moment. We just know that it's 50 metres. It won't be appropriate for all swimmers if it's not got 10 lanes, but that's not being made clear. We need to know, and the people of this city have a right to know, because they're the council taxpayers, what the cost of this is going to be. And it's all right saying we'll drip feed it, we'll give you it in February, etc. You must have some idea now, and you should be talking about what that envelope is now, so that people can understand what they're getting for what you're saying. What they will get in terms of how much they're spending and whether it's fit for purpose.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor West.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Had the details been released before I submitted the motion, I might have welcomed the plans. Unfortunately, they seem to only have been released following the motion submission.
Thank you, Councillor West. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also feel that the timing of this is fortuitous, but there we go. We've had these things happen in this sort of order before. But I think for me, the important thing to note here is that this is not the decision-making body for the swimming pool. If it was, the information we've been given is incredibly thin and insufficient. But it's not. And that comes back to the discussion that we had at the beginning of the meeting about our decision-making processes. And I therefore welcome the comments that Labour have made, recognising the shortcomings of decision-making processes and the fact that they will not have much of a say in the decision on the pool, unless, of course, it's called in. And the decision we make today, in terms of welcoming some information, is not the same as endorsing what we are seeing. And that endorsement will happen through Cabinet, and it will be overseen by scrutiny. That is the process we're working at the moment. In the future, I hope we'll be having more insight from a broader range of people by returning to a Cabinet system. Sorry, returning to a committee system.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Graves.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What I'm not really sure about is why the Labour group are moaning and whining about this. They brought a motion talking about Moorways Pool, and here we have an amendment that telling them exactly when the plans are coming, exactly when the figures are going to be there. What are they moaning about? If you think about the history of Moorways Pool, we have been without Moorways Pool for far too long. Who did that? Who created that process? It's a travesty. It's a travesty for the city of Derby, but it's more of a travesty for the people that live around that area. They've been without their swimming facilities for all this time. What we need to do as a local council is make sure we get a pool fit for those people and fit for the city of Derby. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have no more speakers. Oh, sorry, Councillor Holmes, you have an opportunity to second this, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, if you read the original motion and our amendment, I find it astonishing, some of the Labour comments. And to quote the Michael Gove, Vicky Pollard, you know, yeah, but no, because you want it to go forward, you want something to happen, you want it to be delivered, so we do it, and, oh, no, we don't. What are you up to? No, don't do that. Please don't deliver something which will be fit for this city for 40 to 50 years and deliver a fantastic facility that we can all be proud of. No, don't do that, for God's sake. You know, it's... And if you do want to call it in when it does get to Cabinet, be our guest. Please, call it in. Look, in all seriousness, don't worry about the technology, Councillor Eldred. We're not Alton Towers. Right, we will be delivering probably UK first within this fantastic swimming pool complex, but they're not world's first. They're tried and tested technology. It will work. I think Councillor Barker's going to get his Speedos on and test it out. Probably behind closed doors, but we don't know. So if you need a guinea pig, I'm sure we can find one. Look.
We wouldn't need a wait for, would we?
But yeah, I'm really excited, and I'm sure my colleagues are too, and the whole council should be excited about us taking our time, as we promised in our manifesto, taking our time to look at this. We had concerns over what was being proposed before. Councillor Poulter's highlighted that the funding wasn't quite there, and we've had to work on that, and in due course, on the 13th of February, we'll be very clearly putting out there and discussing in an open and transparent manner how we're going to be funding this project for the city. I'm excited, the council should be excited, the people of Derby should be excited. We are going to deliver a significantly enhanced facility that delivers for decades to come for this city, for everybody to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. I must admit I find the concept of Councillor Barker and a pair of budgie smugglers beyond my imagination. And you wouldn't need a wave-making machine if you jumped in the pool. I'm going to move.
Vote on the amendment.
I'm going to move to the vote. I'm going to move to the vote on the amendment. Thank you. All those in favour, please. Councillor Grimmadale, you get to sum up. Sorry, yeah.
No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. No, you don't. No, you don't.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Grimmadale, it's an amendment. You don't get to sum up.
All those in favour.
All those in favour, please show. Do I need to?
I don't know. Do you need to?
All right, I'll vote for it then. Yeah.
Against? Yeah.
All those against? I think
I was going to invite you to
quiet,
the opening
please.
with your
I think
Speedos
that's
on.
carried. Right, we're now back to the motion as amended. If there are no more speakers, I'll ask Councillor West. Oh, Councillor Shanker, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Holmes, for your impersonation of Michael Gove. I think you it's quite identical. I think you're brilliant. I thought it was him in the room then. Let's just go back a couple of steps here. We asked for plans to be revealed for the revised pool. The Conservative Administration Coalition came in and they said they wanted to review the pool, which we says, yeah, get on with it, do it. You stood on that commitment in your elections. So that started in May, June last year. They were told within 6 weeks or so that it cost £7 to £8 million. Everything else was staying the same. Let's just remember this enhanced facility. Everything we said was going to be in the pool originally, the 50-metre pool, the submersible booms, the learner pool, the gymnasium, the cafe, the soft play area, the commercial area. None of that has still changed. 6 months on, £95,000 later, they tell us they've got some plans. Councillor Grimmadale also has told the press it's affordable. But one thing he's forgot to tell anybody is how much it exactly is going to cost. If you can say it's affordable, you must know what the cost is going to be. And you still withhold that information from the public. You may have some layouts of what you want to do. You absolutely haven't said what you're going to do. You've not importantly said when you're going to do it. And you've not said what it will cost. Also, let's not forget to pay for the bodge job at the Assembly Rooms. At the last Cabinet meeting, £13 million capital receipts was moved from the swimming pool to the Assembly Rooms. But in that report, important bit of detail was missing. There was never any mention in that report that 13 million was coming from the swimming pool to go to the Assembly Rooms. It was only when our group were briefed on those papers and we challenged officers, that report was amended on the day of the Cabinet meeting to include that 13 million was coming from the swimming pool. Mr Mayor, are you going to let this councillor, I suppose she's a councillor, carry on? He's not with it himself. Never mind. So that money had moved across without them wanting to tell the public. Also, it's important to note, the public won't be fooled by this. You know, a manifesto commitment to say we're not borrowing for the Assembly Rooms, but nobody's said now how that 13 million plus the additional money for the enhanced leisure water will be paid for the new swimming pool. We'll welcome any enhancements to that pool, but one thing, guys, you really do need to realise is you need to get on with it. I have a date, 13th of March 2020, the new pool would have been opened. To the original plans, to the original cost, it would have been open. You've delayed, you've dithered, and the indecision has caused this significant delay to this project instead of just getting on with it. And let's remember, the press briefing which was called at the last minute, only when you knew there was a motion coming to full council. Let's have a press briefing, let's announce our plans. Again, a meeting as Councillor West, a Cabinet member meeting, it's on the record, was arranged for November. That's when you had the plans. Earlier on you'd said, a short while ago, Councillor Grimmadale, you had the plans in November. You arranged a Cabinet member meeting and then you cancelled it. You then promised it would go to Cabinet in November. It didn't. You then promised it would go to Cabinet in December, and it didn't. You then promised it would definitely go to Cabinet in January. And guess what? It didn't. Now you tell us it's going to be February. I look forward to it going in February, but get on with the job and deliver the facility. We've scuppered your plans for a big announcement just before the elections, and that's not going to happen now. You've had to come out with these plans. It's not what you wanted. It's gone against your plan to make this big announcement prior to the election. Just get on with it. You've also confirmed today, Councillor Grimmadale, that it's going to be a 2.2 metre depth swimming pool. And again, I look forward to, in your detailed costings, to explain to the public how you're going to pay for a 2.2 metre deep, 50 metre, 10-lane swimming pool. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Shanker has just showed the frustrations that there are with the current cabinet system of governance in this council. He's obviously finding it extremely difficult to readjust himself. Now he's no longer a cabinet member and is a backbench councillor with effectively no power. And this is the problem. And I can understand his frustration. He's in, I think, the largest group in the council and with no power. And it's basically, you know, you have no power. Cabinet has the power. And you're obviously frustrated that you don't know things, you don't know information. Welcome to the world of cabinet governance. That's what it's like. You don't know things. As an opposition councillor, you don't know things. So, you know, you complain and complain and complain, but, you know, your group is in favour of the status quo, as far as I understand, with not wishing to move to a committee system, which would actually give you more power. I just don't understand your logic at all, but then you obviously live in a parallel universe.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Councillor West.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I don't really see the point of the last comment. I am pleased to see the motion has finally got a date for the details of plans and costings to be brought into public domain. That was what we wanted. Unfortunately, we can't agree on the amended motion. We wouldn't be fulfilling our obligation as councillors to welcome uncosted plans, but we'll await the costed plans next month.
Thank you. We'll move to the motion now as amended. All those in favour, please show. You got that? 12, 15, 18, 20. I'll make 23. All those against? No, that is carried. And we're going to do the Emily. Has she gone?
Yeah, she's moving now.
Yeah.
Give her time to get out.
I'll just give the officer time to leave the room, and then we'll move on to item 10, which is designation of the monitoring officer. Councillor Barker, will you move the recommendations as the relevant cabinet member?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, it's a legal requirement that we have a monitoring officer in the council. I know Mr. O'Connell has, for a long period now, been the acting interim monitoring officer and done a very good job, particularly tonight, Mr. O'Connell, I must say. In your deliberations, nothing from them. But on a serious point of view, we have gone through an interview situation in the recent past, and we didn't find a suitable candidate, and so therefore we have looked internally, and Emily Feenan, a long-standing member of this officer of this council, has been put forward as the interim director of legal procurement and democratic services, and I would urge the council to, in actual fact, endorse that appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Holmes or Poulter? Councillor Eldred, do you wish to speak?
I do, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely welcome the appointment of Emily Feenan and the designation as monitoring officer. I just have to question the recommendations and just firstly a quick query. Under 1.2, it says it's anticipated the holder of the director post will also perform the duties of monitoring officer and chief legal officer. This designation requires a decision of council. Does that mean that the designation of chief legal officer requires a decision as council, because that is not included in the recommendation? That's my first question.
Mayor, I think this is a peculiarity of the Constitution here. I think there are references to chief legal officer in the Constitution, which are really duties which would normally be performed by the monitoring officer. So the role, between the role that she has already been appointed to, which is the Acting Director of Legal Procurement and Democratic Services, and the role of monitoring officer, all those bases are covered.
So I just have to as again, we are absolutely not questioning the person who's been appointed to this role, and think that Emily Feenan is more than capable of carrying out this role. I do have to query, though, Mr. Mayor, the process that was undertaken in order to get to us to this point, and particularly under 4.4 in the report, where it talks about a technical interview being undertaken by the strategic director in order to get to the interim appointment, but then an interview with the chief executive and the cabinet member for governance and licensing. Now, is my understanding, firstly, that there is not, as normal practice, any member involvement in an interim appointment, and certainly if there is any member involvement in any appointments at director level within this council, that should be done on a cross-party basis. And so I just question whether or not we are convinced as a council that the process was therefore robust, and whether or not actually this should have been a process as an appointment as an interim director that either should not have involved any member involvement or should have had a cross-party member involvement, to be open and transparent as this administration claims to be, and to follow the normal process that as would be followed. So although I say we are not challenging this appointment and will absolutely support the designation of Emily Feenan as monitoring officer, I do have to question whether or not the process carried out was proper and appropriate and robust. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, I was satisfied that the process for an interim appointment was appropriate to the circumstances we were in. And there may be variance in practice at Derby, but for the purposes of an interim appointment, the advice I've been given as to previous practice is that there is not full members' panels in relation to interim appointments. And certainly when I was appointed as interim monitoring officer, I did not have a cross-party member panel.
But was there any member involvement in that panel?
Yes, there certainly was. It may be described as an interview, but certainly there was a leading member of your group who I had a meeting with prior to appointment.
Can I just add a point of clarification there, please? The monitoring officer, or current monitoring officer, I think is trying to imply I was involved in his selection process. I absolutely wasn't. I'm sure it was after the appointment was made I was asked to have a chat, an informal discussion with Glenn, but that was after officer advice that the appointment was made.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. By chance, last week, I was on some training with the LGA in London. And one of the things that was raised there was the example of appointing monitoring officers. Now, here we've generally, but not exceptionally, had monitoring officers who have a legal background, but that is not necessarily the case in all councils. And they were highlighting the importance that the monitoring officer is a key role, both because they're working with ourselves as elected members and also because there needs to be able to interpret the legalese that we have in our standing orders and so on. One of the things that they mentioned was that this is a really important decision that we are now taking, and I personally have no problems with the candidate we have in front of us. But there is that question about whether or not they have not just the capabilities but also the experience. Now, I'm not aware of what background Emily may have had as a monitoring officer or what training she has already done in that role. And I would like to be reassured that if she hasn't had past experience or hasn't been on some recent training, that we officers ensure that she attends appropriate training in the next month or so.
That seems appropriate.
I'd see no problem in that at all. I mean, Emily Feenan is a very experienced solicitor, qualified for many years, who has come to local government, I think, probably over a decade ago, and has a lot of experience in the work, particularly of this council, as a unitary authority. So I'm fully confident that she has the necessary skills and experience to do this job. But of course, anyone who is involved in the legal profession does require continual professional development. And if there are courses and things like that that are available, I'm sure that they can be used.
To move to the vote then, all those in favour of this appointment, please show. Thank you. Is there anybody against? No, that's carried. Now, before you all